There we go. Thank you. Okay, so we're calling the meeting to order at the appointed time of 1 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. And firstly, we're going to sway from the normal agenda just for a moment so that our CAO, Mr. Armstrong, can bring us a message in relation to Mayor Compass's absence today.
Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Due to a personal health issue, the mayor will be unable to attend until the end of November. I spoke to her on Saturday night. She's doing well. She's on the road to recovery, but she won't be able to be with us. She's really wants to be here, but due to health, she will be back at the end of the month.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And on that note, Mayor Barb, if you are listening, please know that we are thinking of you, we miss you, and we wish you a speedy recovery. We'll move on to a moment of reflection. Thank you. And I should note that we do have quorum with Mayor Klumpus absent and Councillor Bartley absent. There are still 5 of us here, so we will move forward with our agenda. And just in case anyone was wondering what to call me, I'm still just address me please as the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest around the table? And noting none at this time, and remembering that anyone can declare at any point in time during the meeting. And the first item on our agenda today is the tabling of the draft budget, and I'm going to ask our CAO, Mr. Armstrong, to introduce that for us.
Thank you, Worship. Or your there, I picked right.
Not the bad.
First one. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So this process we're about to undertake today is the actual tabling of the budget. This is a culmination of quite a significant amount of work by quite a large number of staff under the leadership of Darcy, our Director of Corporate Services. Just the purpose of today is for Council to receive the budget. It's not to, the intent is not to debate anything in the budget at this particular time. We have, as Darcy will explain in his presentation, other processes that will be in place. What can happen today is if you're seeking clarification of anything in the budget, just so you can understand what's in it, that's perfectly acceptable. But we're not intending to debate it. As you'll see, we've set a couple of days aside to have that in-depth discussion, and it'll be following the public meeting. So, and Darcy will explain just in depth about how those will work and how they'll be laid out. So I'll turn it over to Darcy if you want to do your presentation.
Deputy Mayor, members of council, exciting times today. We get to look at the 2020 budget. As the CAO mentioned, this has been a long process. It is every year for us. We typically start budgeting the last week of July, and it takes us until this point to actually get a full draft budget put together with the 5-year operating outlook and the 10-year capital outlook. So a lot of work goes into this from a lot of people. Of course, all the senior managers, the management team, and a lot of coordinators, administrative staff. Everybody's pitching in to put this thing together within each department, and then of course putting it together in a package for council so that you guys can actually look at it and try and assimilate most of the information over the next couple of weeks. So we'll start off with how we got to where we are. So we brought forward a report on September 23rd outlining a budget framework. The intention was to bring forward a budget based on the approval of the recommendations in that report from council, no more than 4.56%. This was to include 2.06% for operating and 1% for roads, and then subsequently 1% for bridges and 0.5% for our facilities. So what we're looking at is 2.06% operating, 2.5% capital, total budget of 4.56%. That was kind of the starting point. Council also provided some direction with regards to other factors within the budget, the first one being the cost of living adjustment for staff. The draft budget was to include 2.06%, which was the Ontario CPI. This is in keeping with the recently approved COLA policy of Council using the 12-month average of the Ontario CPI. Council also directed staff to take any assessment growth that was relating to new growth from building and development and put that into the general infrastructure reserve. The September 23rd report talked to the fact of an estimate of about 1.7%, which would have equated to about $230,000 to $240,000. So if we move forward in that direction, close to $250,000 would go into the general infrastructure reserve fund for future use, either as offsets for provincial or federal grants that we may not know, or for special one-time projects that come up midway through the year. The municipality also received just over $360,000 in additional one-time federal gas tax funding in 2019, but based on the timing of receiving that money, which we really didn't get until this last summer, it certainly was too late to try and actually spend it on any projects in 2019. So as part of the draft, or the budget framework report, staff provided a number of different options, and the direction that we're going in is taking about half of it, $175,000, and putting it towards our 50% share of reconstructing the Euphrasia-St. Vincent town line. So that road was originally had a surface top on it, but because of maintenance issues a couple years ago, we pulverized it back to gravel. We're now in a position, and Grey Highlands as well, in trying to reconstruct that road. In fact, Grey Highlands is going to take the lead on the reconstruction of it, so certainly a nice project to do from our standpoint, because literally all we're going to have to do is cut the check and just make sure that we're okay with the final outcome of the project. And then the second part of the gas tax is allocating $185,000 towards the Memorial Park Master Plan. Since we are still in the throes of that plan, we really don't know exactly where the money is going to go, but the intention was that it would go towards break wall repair, because we know that we have issues with regards to the retaining wall. So fixing that retaining wall, or dealing with general stormwater issues on site, or erosion control. And certainly this is absolutely probably necessary more now than ever, given what's happened over the last week down there. And then the last bit was from 2016 to 2018, we had been accruing some surpluses. Some of the money had been allocated to a number of different projects, one being concession aid this year, which was just recently done, but there was still some money left over from each of those 3 years, which amounted to about $308,000. So council provided direction to use that money towards offsetting long-term debt costs with the library project. And then subsequently also provided direction to staff to take any 2019 operating surplus that we may have to offset debt on that project as well. So that's the overall direction that council provided to staff in developing the budget. It was actually Councillor Bell who brought up notice of motion earlier this year about budget deliberations. So staff back in the summer brought forward a alternative budget deliberation report, and we outlined a bunch of different things, including having budget days instead of just meetings incorporated into council meetings on the budget. We also pitched the idea of doing some outreach to the public. In particular this year, we wanted to make sure that we got a budget survey out. So the survey ran from September 30th through to November 1st, so it closed just on Friday. As staff, we really haven't had a time to look at any information yet, but we did want to just the very high level stuff, get it out to council so you understood kind of what the uptake was. So we received a total of 551 responses, which really is phenomenal. We mirrored the budget survey off of some of our neighbors that are doing this, in particular Grey Highlands and Town of Blue Mountains. I don't know what the numbers were for Grey Highlands, but I know that Town of Blue Mountains only received about 200 responses to their budget survey. So we certainly, did very well, considering, a population of 11,000 people. We had 5%, fully engaged in this process, and it was an online metric in large part. We did receive 40 or 50 hard copy surveys out of that bunch. So we think it was very successful. As well, the nice thing too is that although it certainly wasn't 50-50 dead on, the split between urban and rural was close enough that any of the responses we believe probably aren't going to be skewed one way or another. We had 42% rural response, 58% urban response. So once we get into the actual data of each of the questions that were answered, if something seems amiss, then we can still break it down based on where the person said they lived, and then the responses from there. So we could do some more analysis if necessary. Not surprisingly, we did ask people also like the resident type that they had. Were they full-time resident? Were they a renter? Were they something other, being seasonal or just transient or whatever it might be? And close to 90% of the responses that we received were full-time permanent residents that actually lived here that were property owners. So clearly, these are the people who really have the skin in the game, when it comes to the budget, because they're the ones who live here, use the services, and then also, invariably pay the tax bill every year as well. So we certainly have got, the right group of people that were responding to this survey. We also asked age, so I think that this bar chart probably is a very good indicator. I mean, I know council is quite aware of our age demographics because we've been going through strategic priorities and economic development, which kind of shows that hump in the 55 to 75 kind of age range. The nice thing is that the age that people put in very much follows that same hump that we have in the community. So it certainly seems as though we hit the mark all the way across the board with the people who are responding. It wasn't just younger people or older people. We had a good mix and a good diversity based on the kind of the age that we deal with in this community, where we certainly have that hump in the 55 to 75 bracket anyways. So what our intention is over the next few days is, as staff, we will be reviewing each of the actual budget questions that were posed during the survey, and we'll release initial information as part of the public meeting on November 13th at Woodford Hall, and then we'll have more follow-up information for the November 25th and 26th budget meetings for council as well. So we'll make sure to get all this information out to you guys so that you can make relevant decisions through the budget process. So the 2020 budget, does deliver on a fiscally responsible budget given the challenges that we face. And I'll go into this just in a couple slides about kind of some of the uphill battles that we had, but ultimately, as much as staff tried to attempt to develop a financial plan with that 4.56% in mind, it just wasn't manageable unless service levels change. So given that there are a number of uncontrollable and fixed costs, we were kind of certainly, I would say backed into a corner and trying to get to that 4.56%. So without actually making direct changes to the level of service, from staff's perspective, it was not possible for us to try and get it down to that level. And ultimately, council is elected to make those tough decisions on service, and as staff, we will follow those directions. So simply put, if we want to take this existing budget and get it down to that 4.56%, it'll be the decisions of council that direct that as far as what services or programs may have to change within this year's budget in order to get down to that number. The one good thing, of course, within this budget, though, is that we still are prioritizing funding on the capital side of things to address roads, bridges, and facilities, which is that 2.5% that council directed us. We're pretty much bang on with that with regards to the budget inputs for 2020. So there are some changes to this budget. It's a good thing Councillor Bartley's not here. He'd be giving me the evil eye right now because we seem to change this every year. But we're certainly hopeful that this is the last major change for a while. It seems I've been saying that every year now for probably 4 years, but we've finally got to a point where I think, as senior management and as council, we're all very comfortable at this stage with the organizational structure. So hopefully the budget can stay put now, because we keep changing the structure of the budget to reflect the changes in the organizational structure. Now that we've got a solid organizational structure, things should stay put for a number of years. So we continue to emphasize the expenses going to the right area, revenues going to the right area, so that program by program, council really knows what the true cost of providing those different projects and programs are. Instead of it being bunched up into kind of administrative functions, we try and break that down into each of the different functional areas. There were some shifts that occurred in corporate management, in particular from prior budgets, because ultimately in the past, we used to have just a solid CAO, dedicated CAO position that stayed within that CAO/corporate management, never got allocated out. The way in which we're working now at this stage of the game is that Rob's position gets allocated 40% to planning services because he still has a planning function. Matt and myself both get allocated 50% to either financial services from a treasury role or the clerk's department for Matt's role within the legislative services. And Tori gets split out 25% to transportation and 25% to the water and wastewater. So the three directors, it's a 50-50 split between corporate management and their respective department. Rob, since he has to take on more of that overall management and CAO function, it's a 60-40 split. So that's kind of how we've made some changes, in particular with regards to the corporate management and how that's all getting funneled out to each of the different departments. There also have been some significant changes within interfunctional transfers within transportation services. So when you look at transportation services overall, the increase is certainly within the line of what we're seeing within other departments. But if you really drill down into each of the functional areas, you'll see some significant shifts between different areas. And that's because of the changing philosophy of work within the department and the fact that we now have full-time mechanics. So each of the different operators are no longer being allocated individually a portion of their time to fleet services. It's simply those mechanics. And we're focusing more and more on urban and rural stormwater and forestry management. So there's more push and more hours being allocated to those divisional areas. So again, the reason is to try and make sure that we reflect what the true cost of providing that service is, so that if anybody, especially a member of the public said, well, can the private sector do it less expensive? We could actually develop a tender based on the requirements that we have, put it out there and see whether, the private sector can do it less expensive or whether it's more expensive. But kind of hard to compare apples to apples if you're not actually allocating all of the right cost to each of those different functional areas. So the base budget, what is included in the base budget? So we talked about the new organizational structure. So salary allocations for all staff based on the changes in the organizational structure are in this budget. So as I mentioned, the 4 directors and our respective roles, the new fire prevention officer in fire services, the new legislative services assistant that was just recently approved a couple meetings ago within the clerk side of things, the 2 new mechanics, and really there was no increase or impact, but we wanted to reflect in this presentation that there are 2 mechanics that council approved as well. And then any compensation increases resulting from the contract of permanent positions that were approved by council as well. So we had 5 different positions that were contract that are now full-time based on a report that came forward a while ago from the CAO. So the manager of human resources, the purchasing agent, planning technician, the cultural services assistant, which is housed at Meaford Hall, and the customer service clerk for the building services department. So all 5 of those positions moving from contract to permanent positions. So that's all included in the budget because these were all prior decisions that council has made over the last 12 months, effectively from the day after, or not even 12 months, I would say last 6 months, since the 2019 budget was approved. So all of those things are included in this. The full discontinuation of the conventional transit program has also been removed from the budget because we're just offering specialized transit now. We did receive word about a week and a half ago that OMPF was released in the values, so we're actually seeing an increase of $20,800. That's been built into the budget because we knew it was there, so we included that. And then increased costs for policing. So there is both a cost increase related specifically to the contract, and then there are also increased facility costs because now we're planning by 2020 we will be leasing the facility back from an independent third-party owner after 390 Sykes Street gets sold. So there's a combination of those two things for the increased policing costs. So, we talked about staffing, about contract to permanent, about a bunch of new positions, so I certainly think it's relevant. The public, I wouldn't say always loves seeing this, but certainly is always interested in seeing what our staffing numbers look like. So we have, steadily been seeing an increase in staffing over the last, 4 years, where we've gone from the equivalent of 78 FTEs all the way up to 93 FTEs. So the part-time seasonal student and full-time equivalents, those 17.4, equate to roughly 48 staff members that are on different types of contracts, and they all get allocated out to make an equivalent full-time. These numbers do not reflect the 36 volunteer firefighters that we have. So as part of this complement, we have an approved complement of volunteer firefighters at a maximum of 36. So that is not included in this number. All right? And it's only because it's virtually impossible to try and come up with an FTE for them, because they're all volunteers and they just get paid based on training and the actual calls. But I wanted to make sure to make it known that this number does not reflect those 36 other individuals who certainly do, great service for the community. On top of that, we also have a bunch of contracted service equivalents. So I think it's important to note all of these, because if we didn't contract this service out, we would be forced to provide it internally, and we would have to have probably just as many, if not more, people to do the same level of work. So, of course, the biggest one is the policing at what we believe to be about the equivalent of 9 staff based on the number of hours that we get billed out. And then it rolls down from there. Solid waste is another big one because of the waste management contract. We have an equivalent of 3. We have everything from transit operations to roadside mowing, all of our parks maintenance, the equivalent for library services based on our share of the contract with the Owensound North Grey Union Public Library. And that all rolls out to almost 17 equivalent full-time staff as well. So go back one slide here to our 93 FTEs and add in another 17. In order to provide services across the municipality for everything that everybody wants and enjoys right now, it takes the equivalent of 110 full-time staff plus our 36 volunteer firefighters. So it's quite an undertaking, but it's reflective of the fact that we provide such a vast array of services to everybody, try and meet the wants and demands and needs of everyone. So what isn't included in the base budget? Since it was just recently approved, there are a number of items from Council strategic priorities that may not be in the draft budget. So things like one of your priorities of 1%, 1%, and 0.5%. So maintaining that 2.5% investment in infrastructure, that is in the base budget because you already provided direction to do so. Working on our asset management plan effectively is already in the base budget because we have staff that are dedicated to trying to meet that goal. But there are a number of things within Council strategic priorities that probably come with a dollar value that are not in the budget, and certainly are not in future budgets because we haven't been building that in because it was just recently approved. So, if there are certain projects or priorities that would, be expected to be done in 2021 or 2022, there's quite a good chance that they are not reflected in the long-term operating budget. Since we don't know what the full direction or implementation of the economic development plan is at this stage of the game, there is nothing in the budget for that. Now, we've held the line within economic development, so for things like advertising, marketing, so on and so forth in the operating budget, those numbers have stayed so that we still have that seed money there depending on what the outcome of the ECDEV plan is. But if there are any new items that need to come from that, they are not in this budget at this stage of the game. Any enhanced services that are either going to be proposed from staff's perspective or that may be proposed by council through the CAO when we get to those budget days, those of course are not included in the draft budget either. And if there are any potential new staffing positions that may be required through those enhancements or for any kind of service level change, they're not included within the draft budget either. So I think it's important to note, I said that we were kind of backed up against a wall in the operating, trying to get to 2.06%, and it just wasn't, feasible for us to do it. So I'm going to take you through this list. These are all assumptions that we've made in the budget because they're known costs because we've already received information back from our partners, or this is what's been built into the budget as the expectation for increases. So the one negative is the increased OMPF funding. So that's almost a $21,000 bonus for us. The annualized cost of the contracts to the full-time, so going all those 5 positions going from contract to full-time, they really didn't see an increase in wage, but what they saw is an increase in benefits, OMERS, all that kind of stuff. That's a $68,000 impact. The additional staffing for the legislative services assistant was $66,000 all in. The annualized cost of the FPO, which in last year's budget was 800 hours at part-time, so no benefits, no pension or anything, to now going to a full-time permanent position, that's almost $63,000 in increase. There's an increased need of $40,000 for volunteer firefighter salaries and training needs. $15,000 that is specific for new recruit training because we don't have enough money and we continue to have to go through recruitment process. The other $25,000 is what's necessary based on training and suppression needs that we're seeing as requirements moving forward. So all those things above, really, they're either been approved or they are necessary. If we were to cut them out, say, let's not add in the $40,000 in volunteer firefighting salaries, we already know that we're probably going to be $40,000 over budget then in that area, because it's the reality of the needs for that department, that $40,000. And that's why I'm saying these are built-in costs that we really can't get around. The next one really is the one that council has any control over in this whole list. So the COLA at 2.06% in total works out to $106,400. We have the employee benefits plan, which is going up by $46,500. CPP, EI, WSIB, EHT, and OMERS all have increases, which amount to just over $46,000. Our sand and salt is going up simply because we know that we have a long-term contract, and because of that contract cost, it's an extra $22,600. Gray Sauble has got back to us and are looking for a slight levy increase of $6,000. Subsequently, the Union Library is setting their budget as well, and because of budget pressures and also because of slight uptick in use within our area, that's amounting to about $13,500. And the last one, as I mentioned before, the policing, the contract and the facility costs combined are almost $73,000. So add up all those pluses and the one simple little minus that we've got there, and it works out to $530,000 in increased operating costs that, at least as staff, we have zero control over trying to reduce. Council has the ability to change the COLA number if they so desire, but as staff we were provided direction on that. So all these items as staff we certainly couldn't skirt around, so they're all included in the budget. So that $530,000 is an important number to remember. Because as we get to this next slide, you'll see that the second line there is the base budget increase, which is $496,800. So as staff, we did our absolute best in trying to cut costs or find new revenue streams where possible to try and offset where we could. So ultimately, again, we'll go back to the last slide, $530,000 in uncontrollable increases, and the net base budget is actually going up $496,000. So we found a way to save about $35,000 or come up with additional revenue streams to offset expenses. So we're actually coming in less than those total uncontrollable costs. So we've really, we've trimmed everything, right? We literally went line by line as a management team, and if there was a budget item for $100 and you didn't use the $100 last year and there's no expense to September on that $100 line item, then the new budget for that line item was zero. We were literally at the point where we were changing numbers by hundreds of dollars, because that's how lean we've got to this point. There just really is, no movement. That is unless, of course, council decides to change levels of service, but that's not something that we as staff can do. So there's almost $500,000 in base budget increases. Roads and bridges funding combined are going up by $273,000, which is 1.95%. So as close as we could get to that magical 2% that council directed us towards, because not every project works right out to the dollar, like right down to the dollar, which leads into the next one, which is facility capital funding. It's going up by $99,000, which is 0.7%. So that's as close we could get to that 0.5% increase number that council directed us. There is an increase in general capital works of $92,800. So that's everything that is not included in roads, bridges, or facilities. So what we're talking about is everything from the library to docks at the harbor to fire apparatus, general fleet, so on and so forth. So everything that's not part of roads, bridges, or facilities. And then last year, council made the decision to use the assessment growth as an offset to the increase. But unless we continue to do that every year, there's always a catch-up year if you decide not to do that, where you effectively lose that revenue from that prior year, because unless you keep accounting for that, there's effectively a loss in revenue. Now, we received some extra OMPF funding. We've been able to increase some of the corporate revenue line items and such things like investment income, because although it's not much, going from 2% on average to 2.5% really does make a difference on a $10 million portfolio, right? So we've increased some of those numbers, but the net offset is that we're effectively short $98,000 in revenue, because we had a $157,000 offset last year. Some of that has been reduced by the OMPF, some of it's been reduced by other corporate revenue, but the net effect is that we're still short $98,000 in revenue because of that assessment. So where that leaves us is requesting $15.1 million as the total tax levy for 2020, and that is 7.55% more than last year, or just over $1 million in increase. So 1% equals just over $140,000. If we looked at 7.55%, this is based on last year's average assessment at $264,000. We will get updated numbers within the next 2 weeks from MPAC, so we can adjust this most likely for the budget days on November 25th. We're looking at an increase to the residential taxpayer of about $120, $120 a year, or about $10 a month. That's what our impact would be to the average property owner. Now, we do have, of course, some properties, 5% of our overall tax base that has assessment that far exceeds that average. So those folks that live on recreational seasonal properties on the waterfront that have an assessment closer to $500,000 on average, they would see an increase in excess of $200 for the year in local taxes. So I know that council isn't happy. I know that council wasn't going to be happy. But I certainly am happy, because as staff, we did a very good job of combing through the budget on every item. As I've said in prior budgets, this is a responsible budget because it reflects us providing services like for like. So 2020 services would not be reduced from the 2019 levels based on this budget, providing like for like. And it's investing in capital where we need to. But I wanted to bring forward a couple examples so that you understand that we're not alone. And it might not be easy to digest, it might not be something that you want to chew on, but we're certainly not alone in this. So we are ahead of some municipalities in budgeting. We are about even with others in the timelines, and some got started slightly before us. So I just wanted to bring your attention to Hanover. So they went through a strategic priority session in early October, and there was a staff report that was brought forward from that. And as part of that report, I took an excerpt from it. So it says here, during the 2016 council planning session, we reported that the current infrastructure deficit in Ontario is estimated at $60 billion. This includes roads, bridges, water, wastewater, storm, transit, conservation authorities, and solid waste management. If property taxes alone were to fund the deficit, it would represent an annual total property tax increase of 3.84% for the next 10 years. This is in addition to the estimated 4.51% annual increase for the next 10 years to pay for increasing municipal operating costs. So Hanover is saying, in their staff report is saying, that effectively their 10-year needs every single year for the next decade, in order to meet their needs, it would be 8.35% every single year for the next 10 years. Compound that over the 10-year, it's effectively a 100% tax increase over a 10-year period. Southgate is going through a process similar to us, and they brought forward a report on their budget, and their capital budget report in particular, went to council in early October. And it said the draft 2020 capital and special projects 10-year forecast has a requirement from taxation of $1.9 million. This is an increase of $152,000 from last year's levels. The asset management plan dated March 13, 2014 contained a financial strategy of increasing the overall levy by 4.93% annually for 20 years to eliminate the infrastructure funding gap. Only nominal increases have happened in Southgate for a number of years, and what they currently find themselves in a gap where they need where they're 46% of where they should be. So what Southgate's capital budget report was saying is that they have a 20-year capital need where they would be increasing the budget effectively 5% every single year for the next 20 years to meet their gap. So I'm gonna bring more data forward to council as we move forward, but I highlighted a number in this slide because I think it's important. I want council to remember this number: $1,908,811. Okay, that's what Southgate's putting towards capital. So let's take a look at our 2020 breakdown. This is a nice pie chart. It's easy to see. Luckily now we're sitting with 4 major departments, and then the library, and then our capital. So it's split up pretty good between each of the different areas. Of course, the CAO and Development Services is the smallest amount because it really doesn't have a significant number of staff, and the Building Services fully offset their own costs with revenues, so that's why they're a smaller piece of the pie. Community Services and Infrastructure Services take up the largest portions, not because Matt so much as wants a bigger piece of the pie, but $2 million in policing costs for operating certainly chew into that. Tori's group with Infrastructure Services, simply because of the road side of things and waste management, it's a large expense. And we're also dumping almost 24 cents of every tax dollar into capital. So important to know, 24 cents of every tax dollar goes to capital. So right now, this is incorrect. I must say that it's not 12.71 million. It should be 12.4 million dollars. There is an addition error of $261,000 that should not be included in this. But this gives you a really good idea of what we're spending money on. So we're proposing about $12.5 million in tax-supported capital. $2.9 million is bridges. We got $3.9 million still left to spend within the library service section for the new library build. There's $1.4 million in infrastructure. That's specific to the projects on Thompson Street to get the alternate water main in so that we can make sure that the MCS property can keep being developed. So we're spreading the money around quite a bit, just over $2 million in roads. That's in large part has to do either with surface treatment, asphalt, gravel. All of those projects combined are just over $2 million. Of course, Frogs Hollow is back in the mix, or Forsyth, or whatever everybody wants to call it. It's back in the mix as well. So this is the total expense. This isn't the funding that's being requested from the tax levy this year. So this is where the money's coming from. Again, that number is incorrect. It should be $12.46 million, not $12.7 million. Now I'll correct that for the public meeting. But so our current year levy is funding $4.33 million. So I told you guys to remember a number. What was that number? $1.9 million, right? So our budget is funding more than double a neighbor's. And I'm not saying that they're not spending enough. Maybe they don't have the same assets that we do. Maybe they don't have the same life cycle, where ours is more at the end of our life than theirs is. What I'm saying is we're spending a lot more money in capital. So if we want to compare ourselves to our neighbors, Let's compare ourselves to Southgate. Maybe our tax rate is 15% higher than theirs, right? The easy way to resolve that is to cut out $2.4 million in capital funding and spend the same amount that they do, right? Dollar for dollar, the same amount. We would be able to reduce our tax rate by 60.5%. So that's why it's really, really hard. I'm making this point so that council is cognizant of this. It is virtually impossible to compare one community to the next without knowing how much they are spending in capital, and even more importantly, without understanding where their assets are at in their age cycle. Folks like us in Owen Sound, we have a lot of assets that are a lot older than, say, places like Town of the Blue Mountains or Hanover, right? Because they're newer communities, they have newer infrastructure because all of their water and sewer was put in primarily in the 70s or 80s. A lot of our stuff was put in ground in the 30s, 20s. We got stuff still back from 1895 that we're replacing, right? So until you understand all of those factors, it's virtually impossible to try and compare us to the next community. So this $12.5 million, we're using every bit of money everywhere, and every funding source that we've got. $4.3 million from taxes. We're taking $1.8 million out of reserve funds. We're using our annual federal gas tax allotment of $333,000. We have $1.6 million coming in grants and subsidies. The grants and subsidies, a lot of that relates to the library stuff for grants and subsidies. Same with the donations and other at $1.5 million. That's the donations and the sale of the property at 390 Sykes Street. We've got a small amount coming out of development charges, and then short and long-term debt. So that short and long-term debt is really made up of two projects. The first being the library, of course. The second one, staff are proposing that the entire cost of the Thompson Street projects will be debt funded. And this falls in line with council's strategic priorities of using debt appropriately where projects are deemed to help from an economic development standpoint in meeting some of the criteria of the municipality, either through housing or employment. So quite clearly we believe that that project fits within that because it's providing servicing along Thompson so that we can also do Cook Street next year, and that will open up the availability of the MCS property to be fully developed. We of course need to touch on the water and wastewater budgets because it's all not just about the tax levy. There are give or take 2,500 properties on our water services, so this affects those folks as well. What we're looking at for base budget increases on the water are just over 7%, and on the sewer almost 6%. This really is reflective on the water side, at least, because of increased costs due to for collection, project coordinator salaries that we're allocating out, again, trying to be transparent with where the costs need to be. And then, of course, all of our folks in the water and wastewater services, get the same COLA increases and step increases and the cost for OMERS, EHT, WSAB, all that still goes up for all those folks as well. So there's salary related cost impacts within those budgets as well. But more importantly, there's also an increased funding for capital in both water and wastewater because we need to make sure that we stay on top of that in order to keep rehabilitating and replacing all the system components for both water and sewers. So this might be a little bit tough to see, but I wanted to highlight that these are the operating budget projections. These aren't the total projections. So in the last slide here, I showed you the total budget's going up by just over 7% for water and 6% for sewer. This slide shows you operating only. So our operating budget on the water is going up by 6%. On the sewer, it's actually going down just slightly. So clearly, especially on the sewer, we're really trying to play catch up with regards to our investment in capital, and that's why the sewers are going up by almost 6%. It's purely related to capital rehabilitation and replacement. So we're not spending even close to the same amount of money annually on sewers as we are on water, and we need to really play catch up because there's a lot of in-ground infrastructure that needs to be replaced and fixed on the sewer to alleviate pressures on the plant, specifically with regards to infiltration and then just really old pipes that we've got in the ground that need to be upgraded to make sure that it can meet the servicing capacities. So this is our capital program for the water and sewer side of things. It's about $2.5 million. So add that to the $12.5 million on the tax side. We're looking at a total capital program of about $15 million, which is split out through 90 different capital projects. So on the sewer and water side, there's a big push on the water treatment. It's almost $1 million. It's the largest piece of the pie there that's brown. Really, in large part, it's one significant project at $700,000, which is the water filtration train replacement. So we did the first train 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago. This is to complete the second train. So we need to update that so that the filter media is all done and it's all up to par. Wastewater treatment is $500,000. A lot of that is the carryover of the existing wastewater rehab that's happening down there. That was about a $1.5 million project that was approved earlier this year. So 2/3 of it's going to get done this year, 1/3 of it will get done next year to complete the project. And then there's some small amounts of money for water main. The water main at $261,000 is one project. That's for replacement of the water main as part of the Trowbridge Street project, or the Trowbridge Street Bridge. Trowbridge, yeah, Trowbridge Bridge, yeah. Anyways, so there's a large chunk of water main that needs to be replaced, pre and post bridge, plus everything under the bridge. So that's what that project is for. The water pumping stations at $260,000 is in large part a project with regards to the Nelson Street pump station. So it needs to be fully upgraded. That's the one that's up by the hospital and provides pressure and service to everybody up in that whole area, all the way over towards the golf course and Pearson Street and everything else, and then as far out as some of the development lands that way as well. So that's why it's absolutely needed, so they can open up some of the development lands on the other side of the urban area. So capital project funding. So the first two numbers here are important to note. So the water rate levy is funding $1.1 million, the sewer rate $652,000. So that's why I want to highlight this, because I said that we're not funding enough on the sewers yet. And the water rate is funding almost double the capital right now. So that's where we're making a concerted effort to really start to push the sewer rate higher with regards to the capital needs, because it's not like it's any cheaper to put a sewer pipe in the ground as it is a water pipe, right? So we have to start really bumping up that investment, especially on the sewer side, in order to try and make sure that we meet the demands long term for the sewer system. We're funding just over $500,000 out of the reserve funds. That's all coming from sewer reserves, not water. And then there's a small amount of money coming from development charges. And that's directly related to that Nelson Street booster station, because a portion of that project is development charge eligible, because of course we'll feed some of the development lands. I mean, it's not huge numbers, but we do have some growth within the urban area. We've got some new residential houses coming on stream. Now, of course, some of that gets offset by the fact that people continue to do a better job of conserving and reducing their water consumption. So, but based on all factors, staff are proposing a 6.5% increase in the water and a 5.5% increase on the sewer. So, important to note these numbers, because they are not directly related to the actual budget increases. These would be the rate increases, and they're slightly lower than the budget, because we're expecting some of that growth to come on and take, it's small, but still a little bit of pressure off of those rates. So we'd be looking at 6.5 and 5.5 for water and sewer respectively. So the next steps. We, of course, are here today. This is the line at the top, November 4th, for the tabling of the operating and capital budgets. We have scheduled on November 13th at 6:30 p.m. the public engagement session out at Woodford Hall. And then there'll be two budget days, November 25th and November 26th, for council to really dive into this and ask detailed questions, both operating and capital budgets. We would then, if everything goes, according to plan, and council certainly has the ability to push this later if necessary, if you're not comfortable with where we're at. But if everything goes well on the budget deliberation days, we get direction from council as to, things to add, things to remove, things to change, we could come back with a revised budget for the statutory public meeting on December 16th. And then subsequently to that, we would actually bring forward the 2020 budget for final approval mid-January after the Christmas break. Okay? So I just want to give a rundown as to what the expectation is for the council budget days. So on the 25th, what we're talking about really is operating. So I'll go over some of the highlights, some of the things that we might have heard at the public meeting, do a recap of some of the important data that we've captured within the budget survey, and any Q&As that may have come forward up to November 21st. So that'll take 10, 15 minutes at the start of the meeting. From there, each department will be provided 45 minutes to present their operating budgets. Then at which time we will actually open up the floor for public Q&As so that council can hear from any member of the public with regards to that specific budget, that specific department. Then from there, the floor will be opened up to council Q&As. All right, so you hear from staff, then you hear concerns from the public, then you get to ask your questions and voice your concerns. And that will be the case for each of the 4 departments, and then the library as well. So it's expected that, if it's relevant for each of the different departments, presentations will include departmental head counts, so that you understand, kind of who's who in the zoo, who's in everybody's department. Budget highlights for each of the different divisions, pressure points that department might be facing, any increased or decreased revenues that we're having to try and deal with, changes in fees and charges. So as part of this whole process, council has to approve the fees and charges. So if each department is making any suggested changes in the fees and charges, we will highlight that on that day. We will look at any operating projects. So those one-offs, one that comes to mind for my department will be the development charges background study update. So we'll provide some information on that project, because it's not a capital item, but it's also not part of standard year after year operating practices. So that's why we separate those out. And then just a brief outlook on the future of any budget shortfalls that we see coming forward within the 5-year horizon. On November 26th, it'll take a bit of a different turn, because we're going to be talking about is capital and enhancements. And not all departments have capital budgets. And not all departments might have enhancements either, right? So for somebody like Rob's whole area, which is very service-centric versus, capital-centric, I'm not even too sure if Rob has any projects right now in the budget. You might only have 1 or 2. So each department will be provided up to 45 minutes. So for those like Tory, who of course, roads, bridges, and all the infrastructure will probably take the 45 minutes. Rob or the library team certainly won't. So each department will have up to 45 minutes to present capital. So what will be presented is major projects in 2020, which will highlight both the expenses and the revenues, and also talk about the project description and the rationale as to why we need to do these projects. We'll highlight critical timing of any projects. So certainly want to make sure that if council is wavering on any capital projects, we will highlight those that are critical that absolutely would need to happen in 2020. If it's because of existing failing infrastructure, or because it has timing elements with regards to development or something like that, we'll highlight all of those. And then we'll also do a brief overview of the 10-year outlook for capital as well, so council can understand kind of what's coming down the pipe. After that, any enhancements that will be proposed by any of the departments, each enhancement will have up to 10 minutes to present the enhancement, followed by public Q&A and council Q&A. So we really hope that it's going to be 2 long days with a lot of information, but we hope that we've broken it out so that there is kind of an ability to almost have a mental break in between each of the presentations, listen to what the public's concerns might be, and then be able to ask any and all questions that you have department specific. We've broken it out like this as well, so that we will actually make the agendas very clear and transparent. They'll be posted as part of the council agenda, so that any member of the public that's coming, if If they only want to talk about their bridge, they don't have to sit through the whole day. If they know that roads is happening starting at 1 o'clock, they can come for the 1 o'clock meeting, sit through the presentation, ask their question, then they can leave afterwards. This has also been done like this because there's advantages from staff's perspective as well. We want to make sure that it's just not the four of us talking heads, in front of you for those two days. We're going to make sure that our staff that are involved in these projects or these budgets are going to be here as well. So we'll have our management teams in behind us to support us and to actually help with some of the presentations as well. So we want to make sure that their whole day, kind of isn't chewed up by sitting for meetings as well. So if they know the timing, then they know that they can be here on time, help with the presentation, and then they can leave after the questions have been asked. So that's how and why we've developed the way we have. So questions and answers, this is the same process that we've been following. I think this will be the 4th or 5th year now. So we have a budgets@meaford.ca email address. So certainly members of the public, we want them to use that. If we get budget questions asked of us that aren't going to that, we will forward them on to that because it becomes in the repository so that we know from a tracking perspective. So the same we would ask council as well. If you have questions related to the budget, we would like you to send your questions to budgets@meaford.ca because that's where we're going to track everything. That's where we will answer it from. And then all of that information will get compiled on a weekly basis into budget Q&As that get posted to the website as well. So the expectation would be that the first Q&A, as long as we can pull it off, will actually be posted hopefully by the 15th of November, and it will at least include some, if not all, of the questions and answers that were asked on November 13th at the public meeting. So that's kind of the expectation. That way we get information out, then all of you as council also get to see it at the same time as well, so you're all getting the same information and can all make the same informed decision. With that, I will open it up for any questions that council has.
Okay. Mr. Chapman, I'll just begin by thanking you and staff for the tremendous amount of work that has gone into the preparation of what you have presented to us here today. And you're correct, we don't like the numbers, but at least we have an understanding of why they are what they are to start with. So I thank you for that, and I will ask for any questions from council. Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I would like Mr. Chapman and the clerk to put up page 8, if you would, please. On page 8, we see this all the time about the impact to the homeowner.
Oh.
At least that's page 8 that I have here.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah,
it's actually,
Right
there.
Yeah, the property tax to
Yeah.
a homeowner in residential. I'm asking if it would be possible for people to also see that the tax burden, as it were, is not borne solely by them, but there's also some commercial and some industrial. If that would be possible to put that in so that, business also pays into the existence of this municipality. And one other thing that I've been reading, and you did mention about impact. I've been reading that a mill rate, one mill was like $1 to $1,000 on your assessment. So if you had a $300,000 home, you're looking at a $3,000 tax. But what does that mean here in the municipality of Meaford? And are you at a position to say what our mill rate would be ultimately? We can, but are you at this point?
through worship, or sorry, Deputy Mayor. So at the first point, it's easy on the residential because MPAC breaks it down by different property classes. So I certainly don't, I like the idea. I guess I just would be asking for some direction. Would it be sufficient to just pick a number, an assessment value for commercial and industrial and add it into the chart? So, you know, $300,000. So, because we don't really have averages, because the industrial and commercial is all over the place. I mean, we could do the same thing with farmland even as well, right? I mean, maybe just take like, you know, $200,000 as the average assessment for, you know, vacant farmland and say, and then work it out from there, because I don't have averages for those. They don't provide them the same way as they do on the residential side with MPAC, but as long as you're okay with me just, I mean, really realistically just blindly picking a number out of the air and then running the numbers from there, I certainly don't mind adding it to the chart.
Well, I think that would be all right, Mr. Chapman, and you could, when you're doing your presentations, of course, you can add that caveat that, I mean, just looking at the commercial entities that we've got, when we went through the ACDAV session, we had a number presented to us, how many commercial entities were in our municipality. And I mean, you could run the numbers on that and say, on average, and just do a caveat of that, you know, the homeowner's not alone bearing the weight.
Yep.
And then to my question about the mill rate.
Yes.
That will happen.
Yes, so the local mill rate for 2019 was right around 0.76, I believe. So in essence, you know, you were paying 76 cents. You know, in your example, you were saying it was $1 per. In our, you know, in reality, it's about 76 cents per dollar. So if you, or per $100. So if you had a $300,000 assessed house, you're paying about $2,250, $2,300 in local taxes. Now, the tax bill from the municipality, like the actual bill you get, is higher than that because it includes the county and education, you know, bundled on top of that. But we can't control those. So the part that we can control is about 76 cents per $100.
And are there other questions around the table from Mr. Chapman? Councillor Kentner?
This is a strange question maybe, but at what point in the four-year cycle, if we were thinking of changing the approach to how we run an election, you know, like I don't want to leave that till for another 2 years and find out, you know, oh, we're so far down this path, nothing can be done. What is the story there?
Well, I'll talk about the financing and then I'll pull it over to Matt. So we take a very standard approach. We figure that, you know, the elections typically cost us about $60,000 based on our, you know, current processes. So we effectively budget $15,000 in every off year for the elections. That money goes into the election reserve. And then in the year of the election, we pull that $45,000 out, plus allocate $15,000 from the actual levy to get to that $60,000 number. So, you know, from a finance perspective, unless we were going to change the election process where it exponentially cost way more, then it really wouldn't affect the budget process. It's really just going to affect what you expect for elections. And I'll push off to Matt.
Through the Deputy Mayor, we will be bringing forward a report next year to make some recommendations about election methodology. But what we've discovered over the last number of cycles is that the cost of the various different options isn't so extraordinarily different that the method we have right now of putting aside money each year would cause us a major problem, except in one or two extreme cases, which I wouldn't be recommending.
Thank you.
Councillor Greenfield?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Peavy. And thank you, Darcy. Thanks to all the staff members who have contributed to this budget. I know, or I have a vague idea of how much work you have put into this, how much time. And I mean, this is a large corporation, and it needs a lot of concentrated effort. I'm assuming, as in the past, if councillors have questions, that they can send them directly to you, and you will respond in a fine fashion. This is as opposed to being at a public meeting.
Through the Deputy Mayor, yes, I would request that instead of sending it to me, you send it to the budgets@meaford.ca. And I say that simply because my inbox, unfortunately, recently is getting inundated with a lot of stuff, and I may not get to responding to things as quickly as I would like. So the advantage of it going to the budgets@meaford is that one of our frontline staff manage that, and she will make sure that I provide answers in a timely fashion. So it's best if it goes to that email address.
Thanks for that, Darcy. Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. Just a couple of comments. I'll try to keep it non-specific, but we do have a number of projects suggested that are waterfront related, shall we say? And I'm just, I wonder if we should be very, very cautious as a council because of what Mother Nature is doing to us and has been doing to us, and seems relentless that she wants to continue with this. Those might be some projects there that we may be very careful about going forward with. And the only other thing I want to say is it's just a half a statement on about the middle, well, a third of the way down on page 4. It says, without council direction to change existing service levels. I think we should remember that we do have that option. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Greenfield. I'll jump in with a couple of thoughts, if I may. One, I think you mentioned it was $40,000 for fire training for recruits. And I thought it would be important for council to know that currently our new recruits haven't been getting paid for their initial training. And if we're going to be successful, I think, in attracting and retraining recruits, it's appropriate to make sure that those young men and women are paid. And that would be part of why that $40,000 is there. I wanted to ask Mr. Chapman, will this be the actual agenda that's presented on November the 13th in Woodford?
Through the Deputy Mayor, it will have similar information, but it will also contain more information. So we're going to add some more information with regards to the budget survey, and then some more information with regards to some of the comparator stuff, but then also chop out a few of the things that, so the intention is so that my hope is that we get to 40 minutes-ish as a total presentation. I think probably anything beyond that, people will start getting antsy having to listen to staff's voice for that long. And then that way we can open it up for questions and answers. But I'm going to try and condense some of the information a little bit more for the public.
If I may suggest, though, Mr. Chapman, I think the public is very curious about the capital side. And if that could be included, I think people want to know where we're investing their tax dollars.
Yes, through Deputy Mayor, one thing I have staff working on right now is a map, at least for the roads and bridges stuff, so that we provided the last public meeting, and I think it went over pretty well. People could pick them up at the door, so then you can visualize kind of where we're planning works and what, I mean, things like ditching or brushing or whatever are not included in that because it's just maintenance, but the actual roads that we're planning on, you know, resurfacing, reconstructing, the roads that are going to get gravel this year, that will all be included on that map.
Good.
Through Deputy Mayor, if I can just add on the fire side of things, an excellent point to be made. Obviously, the fire chief will be here as part of the 2 budget days, and so we'll be able to give a bit more detail on this. But yes, for some time now, our recruit classes for the fire department have not been paid, and I think important to stress that it's not just that they haven't been paid during their training; they also haven't been paid for a period of time after their training when they are in effect operating as regular firefighters. From an equity point of view, that is something as a senior leadership team we've been very keen to fix over the last couple of years, and the fire chief, the HR manager and myself have made a decision and have already started to pay this year's recruit class because we believe that is truly important. They are committing an awful lot of time and energy and taking significant risk on our behalf. So that is already in place, and it is a reason why the training budget for the fire department is over budget for 2019, and of course that's part of what's being reflected in the 2020 costs.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm wondering if I could request of staff that we have a new org chart printed for our November 25th and 26th meetings. It just might be helpful to us.
Certainly, I think that we can print them for you. They'll also be incorporated into each of the presentations as well. And council will get copies of those slide decks, so you'll probably have it multiple ways.
Good, thank you. And one last question, if I may, before we go on. Back to page 13 and the projected rate increases for water and sewer. I wonder if you could speak to us about sort of how much development it takes to make a difference in those costs. The water rate study, I believe we'll be undertaking that in 2020. Would that have any impact, as well as Councillor Kentner's motion some time ago about potentially utilizing some of our excess water capacity?
Through the Deputy Mayor, actually, we have the water rate study will be brought forward to council on December 16th, or December 2nd and the 16th, or December, because it needs to be adopted by council prior to December 24th, which is the final date that can be provided to the ministry to make sure that we stay in compliance. So finance, asset management, and the water and wastewater groups are working on that plan right now as we speak. So there does need to be a significant increase to make any kind of a significant difference, if that kind of makes sense. We have more capacity than we'll ever use within the water treatment plant. On the sewer side of things, though, there is a limited capacity before we have to effectively upsize or twin the plant, and that's give or take 700 units. So I would say that, if we could get significant development to happen in a very, condensed period of time, you could actually see a net effect of decreased rates. The problem is that because we're having to put so much money into capital, not because of the water plant or the sewer plant so much, but because of the in-ground infrastructure that's already there, that would still service new development, the rates will continue to probably rise every year, irrespective of development, because we're not going to see 250 units come in like that, right? So we see this steady growth where, there might be 20, 30, 40, in-town fully serviced residential units. That helps to offset, because people more and more, new houses don't use as much water to begin with, because they're developed and designed with all these low flow qualities to begin with, so they're more efficient. And then as houses, the existing housing stock changes hands from one owner to the next, many people go in and some of the first things that they do are new toilets, new shower heads, new faucets, and that helps to reduce as well. So there is a competition there where new growth, the hope, at least from staff's perspective, is that new growth will offset, continued conservation efforts. So at least we're not seeing any, future increases in rates because we're actually using less water, which happened a couple of years ago for a 2-year period, where we're actually seeing greater declines in use than we were seeing new growth. So that's kind of, the long answer for the short question, that unless we see huge growth numbers, we're probably still going to see continued increases.
Thank you. Are there other questions around the table for Mr. Chapman? Councillor Kentner?
I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but there was a lot of numbers and I must have missed it. But is there a comparable for Meaford in terms of in Hanover, they need 8.35% annually in order to meet their infrastructure needs, and in Southgate, over a 20-year period, 4.93%. What is our comparable percentage?
I don't have a percentage. What I can tell you is that if you look at the long-term capital model that was provided as part of this overall package, the very first summary sheet shows all the divisions and all their needs over the 10-year period. And over the 10-year period, so from 2020 to 2029, we have approximately $80 million worth of tax-supported needs. That's not the total capital budget, that's just the tax-supported needs. So if we're funding $4.3 million right now every year, we're about $4 million a year short. So $140,000 is 1%. We would need a 26 to 28% increase this year that never goes away to meet our needs.
Councillor Vickers?
So it took Barb a long time to get me on to calling her the worship. So I'm not for a month's worth of grace. And I feel that you're very worshipable, so you will be the worship here for the next, as long as you sit in that chair. So through the worship, I think it's page 4, if you go back to one of those early pages, Darcy. I think you went by it, actually. No, 6 then. Try 6. Oh, I was at it, but then I changed it. No, it's page 7. Yeah. So you take the employee benefits plan, the CPP, EI, WSIB. Is that 46,005 and 46,003? Is that a direct correlation to the 2% in COLA increase, or is there something else at play in there?
Through the Deputy Mayor, no, there's increases every year. So, CPP, the basic minimum was $54,000 last year, now it's $57,000, right? So, and then on top of that, there's a percentage increase that it's going up. So those are the correlating factors. Those are the increases based on like the $6 million in total payroll that we have. Right? Not the $100,000 in increase because of COLA.
So if the salaries went up hypothetically 0%,
Yeah.
they would still be an increase in the employee benefits and the CPP then, would there?
Yeah, so the
get to those
the
increased
increase, yeah, so that $106,000 includes the incremental increase in those benefit costs if we had the 2.06%. So that's the total that you would save. I hope that everybody understood what I said there. So if, what we do is we establish the total compensation budget at 0%, plug all the numbers in, say whatever the increase is, then go back and punch in 2.06% increase, and whatever the difference is in the total between the 0 and the 2.06%, that's what we give you, and that's 106,400.
So that 46.5 and 46.3 would be there.
They're there no matter
regardless,
what.
no
Yeah,
matter what.
yeah, because that's based on the base compensation budget, no matter what.
Okay. Yeah, and those numbers always, they're hard to, for a person that's not making the payments, it's hard for them to understand, why they're going up. Okay. So the roads, we had Smart Scan done this year. Did we include the knowledge we have from Smart Scan in on this budget, or is it still too early for it to get there?
That's a heck of a good question, Deputy Mayor. No, we absolutely did, as much as we
I'm
could.
just a counselor.
No, it's through the Deputy Mayor. Or Your Worship. Yeah. So we're still working on trying to actually refine the data, but what I can tell you is that we didn't use the roads SOTI document from 2014 to make decisions. We used the street scan data. So there were, for lack of a better term, there was green, orange, and red roads, right? So we made sure to choose roads that were red. And we used some, other than just the color that was shown on the map, we used some other, metrics to try and figure it out, including, we picked some of the roads especially in the resurfacing program that we've got. I think that there's 4 or 5 road sections. Those were higher use roads or super high maintenance roads. So where we're spending, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 on cold mix, smearing it all over the place. Those are the types of roads so they were poor quality, poor ride roads, so that's why they were showing up with a low pavement condition index through the street scan. But then on top of that, we went back to Jeff and his team and said, okay, here's all of them. Which ones would you choose? They gave us a list, and then from there we went and doubled down with regards to the traffic data and tried to pick, the highest priority ones based on that traffic data then.
So even the traffic data that's been collected back there around the 1st of September is starting to show up in some of the numbers?
Yeah, so we've got, there's over 500 road sections. There's about 100 road sections that were not completed this year, and they were all in the urban area.
Okay.
So there's still a lot more work. Like, we'll really have a better understanding next year, but we've tried to use this new data to the best of our ability for the 2020 program, because we recognize that council was not thrilled, for lack of a better term, with the preservation model, so we've tried to use the data as best we can.
Well, I congratulate Tori, you're starting the job off well. So, one other question I do have is so we've been putting aside 1% for bridges, roads, and all about infrastructure, for the last, let's say, 3-4 years at least, since 14, so 4 or 5 years then. So does that money, like it continuously keeps, like it never disappears? So we're paying it, so really we aren't just paying an extra 1% on roads and 1% on bridges, we're actually paying probably 5 or 6%, if whatever the number is.
Yes, through the deputy mayor. So the bridge funding at $273,000,
Okay, yeah,
which is
you're going where I want you
right.
to go.
So that's 1.95% of the levy, right? That is not 1.95% of what we've spent on bridges and roads before.
Okay.
So the roads and bridges capital is about $2.5 million. So if we're adding $273,000, we're actually adding 10%, give or take, to that pot of money,
Okay.
right? Like it compounds year after year.
And so does that go into a reserve fund? Because I notice even some of the reserve funds are getting tapped into fairly heavy. So do they go into the reserve fund and then get pulled back out, or how does it? I know it's just
Yep.
an accounting kind of a logistics thing, but
I would say yes, it does, and no, it doesn't. So we have so many projects that we budget for every year that effectively the in-year levy gets spent that year.
correct.
That being said, what we actually do with the entire capital levy, so we're levying $4.3 million. This draft budget shows $4.3 million. Every penny of that goes into the respective reserve funds depending on which project it's for. And then we pull from those reserve funds when we do the projects. So the expectation is that the money is there. So if for some reason a project gets started late and has to hop into the next year to get finished up, it's not like you have to rebudget money. You rebudget for the project, but 100% of the funding comes from that reserve fund. So that answers your question about we're tapping into reserve, right? The other part behind it is, and it won't be as rosy, this is a good example, but it won't be as rosy as what council first thought. So Sykes Street Bridge, right? We had budgeted $1.4 million for the project. The tender came in, plus the engineering, it was around $1.1 million. So we said, okay, we got $300,000 to play with. We're going to take that money and put it into the roads reserve, right? To use it for the future. So that's how this works. So then that's how sometimes those reserves get built up so that we can then use it. Because then the flip side, what may happen, and what did happen a couple of years ago when we did a prior section of Thompson Street, we were the tender came in significantly over budget because of bridge-related issues, storm scepter, and just road-related problems. So then we were able to use those reserve funds to offset that right then, like we pulled from the reserve fund. So that's typically how we do it. If there's any surpluses in an individual project, stays in the reserve fund, so we have it for the future, kind of if we ever need it. If either a project comes in over budget or we get into the field and there's a change order for something that was unforeseen, then at least you've got money to fund it.
All right, any other questions around the table? Then I'll ask a couple more if I may, Mr. Chapman.
Yeah.
We don't see bridges 21 and 22 mentioned here in the budget. Is that because, my assumption is anyway, because those monies are already in reserves?
That is correct, plus we don't know what the outcome is because we don't have a boundary road agreement, so we don't know what the direction of the Township of Chatsworth is going to be. And in large part because we don't know, plus we know that council's already allocated money into the reserve funds, through a kind of a bit of a moving shell game with regards to the grant funding. It was done transparently at council, but that's how there's money sitting in the reserve for those bridges.
Thank you. I also wondered on page 6, the 2020 staffing contracted services equivalent. How might that compare to the 2019? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I think through the deputy mayor, it was about 2 or so higher. And that's because we've had some changes with regards to some of the contract services that we provide, that we no longer do, out of service, one of them being mechanics, I believe, through outside shops, and I can't remember what else it was that I had to omit from.
The transit, I think.
That's, yeah, well, the transit went down, yes, so we had
Yes.
1.6, now it's down to 0.9, so, yes,
Okay, so it's less than it was last year.
yes.
Okay. Okay. One last call for questions and comments. Councillor Kentner.
Could we get an update on the status of, like, whose court is this agreement in? Is it in Chatsworth Court or our court on these two bridges that we need an agreement with them to proceed?
Through the deputy mayor, I inquired with the clerk/CAO on Friday at the meeting that I was at. They indicated that they are happy with the legal terms of the agreement, that their roads individual, Grey Highlands roads individual, and a desire to meet with Tory as well in discussing the maintenance standards, which is an appendix of the agreement. Just needs to be worked out, but from what I understand, we're close. It's just getting that meeting completed and getting it done. So I hope very shortly.
Supplementary, if I may, through your deputy mayor. So could those bridges move into the 2020 budget?
Through the deputy mayor, I mean, having the agreement in place doesn't mean that the bridges are going to get repaired, because we have to then actually negotiate that with the township of Chatsworth, and if it's 50-50, they have to have 50% of the money as well, right? So I would say at this stage of the game, and this is why we didn't put it in the budget, it's too premature to assume anything, but we do have money sitting in a reserve fund. So let's say this, best case scenario, Chatsworth is on board and can find money themselves, right? We as staff, Tory in particular, can bring a report forward to council to request using that reserve fund money in 2020 and effectively establishing a budget at that time, if that's a possible timeline.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So one last capping comment. Last year, we were looking at around $30 million. This year, with what's presented tonight, at 15, 1, and 12, we're at around 27.7. Is that about where we're sitting?
Through the deputy mayor, no, because we're not comparing apples to apples with that. That is separating operating from capital, and the $32 million number also includes water and wastewater. So it's total expenses,
Okay, so
not the revenue stream. So
where are we?
I have not had an opportunity yet to provide that update, but it will be part of the presentation for the public meeting for Woodford.
Thank you.
Okay, one last call for questions. And not seeing any hands, then I will call a break until 3 p.m. when we will resume our regular council meeting. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to resume our meeting of council at the appointed time of 3 p.m. I want to welcome everyone here in the audience today. We always love to see people come and participate in our council meetings. I want to let you know that we did begin at 1 o'clock today with the tabling of our draft budget. And don't worry that you missed that. There will be lots of opportunities to participate in public sessions related to that as we move forward. And you'll be given the dates of all of those. Some of you may be wondering why I'm sitting in this chair, so I'm going to pass over to Rob Armstrong, our CAO, who is going to let you know.
Spoke to her on Saturday. She's doing very well, but she will be unable to assume the seat to the end of the month. So in the interim, the deputy mayor will be assuming the seat in their absence.
Thank you, Rob, very much, and we do wish our mayor all the very best as she recovers. We are at item 5 in our agenda, which is announcements, and so I'll ask around the council table if anyone has anything they would like to bring forward. Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keaveney. I would just like to remind everyone about November the 11th. As usual, there will be a gathering down at the Cenotaph, and this year we are asking that people, after the Cenotaph ceremonies are over, that they come back to the Meaford and St. Vincent Community Center, and that's where chili and hot dogs, everything's going to happen back there. In years past, Royal Canadian Legion Branch 32 had invited people back to the branch, but we have been finding that everybody likes to gather at the community center, and so we're going to concentrate our efforts there after the wreath-laying ceremonies take place downtown.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Kentner?
Thanks for reminding me, Councillor Bell. On Saturday, November 9th, there are 2 showings of a Remembrance Day program at Woodford Hall put on by the Meaford Theatre Company, and I have a very tiny cameo part in that. But a lot of community members are involved in a tribute to Remembrance Day, and there's a performance at 2 in the afternoon and another one at 7 p.m. at Woodford Community Hall.
Thank you, Councillor Kentner, and Councillor Greenfield.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keaveney. This is an event that has taken place, but all through the summer, council members have been receiving updates from the Meaford Coyotes running club. Now, these are 2-legged coyotes, and their season was pretty well capped off back last Saturday, and 4 members of the club ventured to beautiful downtown Sudbury for the provincial cross-country final. They arrived to 6 inches of wet snow in Sudbury, and their route was no better. But 2 of the Coyote members, there were clubs from all across the province. 2 finished extremely well. Haley Abbott and Maddie Calder ended up 29th and 86th in a field of 253. Now, they weren't right near the top, but when they combined their totals, they actually were, in 2-person teams, they were the 2nd best team in the event. A couple of other runners, Avery O'Neill and Devlin Gillis, also performed very well. These are amazing young people. Now, these, I think, were all in secondary school, but the Coyotes have kids 5, 6 years old. They run their hearts out, and this area is extremely lucky to have this group and all these young entrepreneurs who help put our area on the map. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greenfield. Anyone else? Then I have a few. I wanted to begin by extending a huge note of congratulations to our Chamber of Commerce for a most successful and well-attended Meaford Dragons event last week. Their host, Andrew Chapman, was funny, entertaining, and terrific. The contestants were well prepared, and the Dragons were both professional and generous. The winners were Kim and Matt Simpson of Free Spirit Forest and Nature School, taking home $6,500 in cash and in-kind prizing, and they also won the Rotary-sponsored Audience Choice Award, so congratulations to them. Second place went to Rebecca Chapman of the Pampered Paw. She has a little shop right down beside the laundromat. Wednesday was definitely confirmation that entrepreneurism is alive and well and flourishing here in Meaford. I'm so proud that our council has supported this event in a big way with $5,000 through our community granting program. Our municipal website, I think a number of you, I hope all of you have had a chance to look at our new website, and I'm thrilled to let you know that our redesigned municipal website that was launched this past March has won gold in the MarCom Marketing and Communication Awards. The MarCom Awards Honor of Excellence in Marketing and Communication, which recognizes the creativity, hard work, and generosity of industry professionals. Each year, about 6,000 print and digital entries are submitted from dozens of countries. Judges and our industry professionals who look for companies and individuals whose talents exceed a high standard of excellence and whose work serves as a benchmark for the industry. So talk about putting Meaford on the map, Councillor Greenfield. So a huge note of thanks and congratulations to our communications manager, Haley Thompson, and her team for the work on this website. 2020 budget engagement sessions on Wednesday, November the 13th at 6:30 at the Woodford Hall, 107 Woodford Crescent. You will have your opportunity to get information on the draft 2020 budget that, as I say, was tabled and presented to Council this afternoon. You will be able to ask questions and provide your feedback to Council. We will also be live streaming the session for those who can't make it. And for more information, please visit www.meaford.ca budget 2020, and you can also submit your questions online. The Meaford Museum Holiday Gift Shop, that will be Saturday, November the 16th from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. at the museum on 11 Bayfield Street. That's their annual holiday gift shop show and sale. Lots of great artisans will be there just in time to stock up on your gift shopping for the holidays. And I can tell you it's a great show. It cost my wallet dearly last year. The Meaford Kinsman Santa Claus Parade and Window Unveiling will take place on Saturday, December the 7th at 7 p.m. The Santa Claus Parade will be followed by Meeting Santa Claus. The parade is part of Meaford's annual downtown Christmas celebrations, including the tree lighting and window unveiling. That's a great event. Okay. If there's no other announcements, then we'll move on to public participation. And I'll just read the piece that goes with this. Members of the public are encouraged to provide council with their comments and questions. Presentations must be prearranged with the clerk's department before the agenda is released. Members of the public who wish to make a deputation about a specific agenda item or ask a general question must register before the start of the meeting. Deputations are limited to 5 minutes, while public questions are limited to 2 minutes. So today we have no presentations. We have one deputation and no one registered for public questions. So our deputation today will be from Tom Buck, President of the Sunnyside Beach Association. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate having the opportunity to comment. What's my limitation on time?
We're suggesting 5 minutes, Tom.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Tom Buck. I reside on Cedar Avenue. I'm president of the Sunnyside Beach Association, and I'm a team member of Save Georgian Bay. Our very best wishes to Mayor Klumpus for a speedy and 100% recovery. As a team member of Save Georgian Bay, I ask for you and all community leaders to join us in our challenge to the pump storage plant proposed by TransCanada Energy. This plant will kill fish, will hurt the environment, and is an old technology. Better and less costly alternatives for energy balancing in Ontario have been invented and brought to reality. TransCanada Energy is a profit-seeking enterprise. If this need for demand balancing is real, for the sake of Ontario ratepayers, there are ways to do it for $1 billion less. TCE is spreading money in the community, and that feels nice, I'm sure, but please do not let that fool all of you into trusting their purpose. It is profit. Here's a headline. From November 1st, the Keystone Pipeline spill is the biggest onshore crude spill in a decade. This was released on November 1st, Liz Clayman, Fox Business. In the report, they identified that 1.4 million liters of oil were spilled by this project that TransCanada Energy owns. They are busily trying to clean that up. Here's another one. TransCanada dismissed whistleblower. Then their pipeline blew up. This is from February 2016. It was in Canada's National Observer in an article by Mike D'Souza. These articles are troubling, but I found quite a number more that showed a pattern of low environmental intelligence. These people put things in place. They have a culture that does not pay attention to the environmental the environmental needs up front. They do not prevent, they mitigate. They mitigate these issues. So this is who you're placing your faith in, rather than 9,000 community members who have signed a petition to save Georgian Bay and who have asked you to represent their interests and object to this proposal. Many of these 9,000 have lived in this community their entire lives. This will be the Meaford monstrosity if it's constructed. It will offend the Bay, it will interfere with the Department of National Defense's training operations, and it will be a heavy nuisance to community members. I ask anyone watching to let the Department of National Defense know how this is a bad idea and your neighbors don't want it. You can find the website to respond by searching, by going to our website, our Facebook page, Save Georgian Bay, facebook.com, Save Georgian Bay, or our petition on change.org. Just search for Save Georgian Bay. We'll have the information on where to report your comments. I'm very pleased that TCE is coming to town to make a presentation. TCE to date has not told us how we'll achieve zero fish kill. It won't tell us how to achieve zero impact on the environment. They won't tell us how to have zero impact on neighbors with high tension lines and their operations, yet their publications say they are going to do all these things, although the word they use quite often is mitigate. These questions can be answered now. They don't have to do any more research. Tell us how they will get. Ask them, please ask them how they'll get zero fish kill. How will they have zero impact on the environment? How will they have zero impact on their neighbors and Department of National Defense operations? Ask them. Make them answer that question. They can answer that now. The problem is they can't. They cannot achieve zero impact. That should be the standard, though. Won't you join us in letting the Department of National Defense know we don't want this plant in our community, and that if DND, in fact, has completed their mission for this expropriated property, then they should return it to the former owners and not turn it over to a private enterprise that will offend our community like TCE will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Buck, for your presentation and for your ongoing diligence and your work with Save Georgian Bay. And I do agree we need to ask some tough questions of TC Energy, and we look forward to doing that when they come to do their presentation in Meaford. And I know that everyone, I hope, will be able to stay to hear the updates in a report that's coming up a little bit later in our agenda in relation to TCE. Okay, if there is an opportunity for anyone who wishes to ask a public question, even if you didn't register, does anyone wish to come forward? Okay, then we will move on. Certainly, come on up, sir, and give us your name.
Good afternoon, it's Barry Ward. Question I have is there is a questionnaire out there that's been signed. Tom just made reference to it. If, I don't know the data, but if, let's say, 75% of the people in the town of Meaford were against this pump storage facility, what would council's position be as far, would you not have to represent the majority of people within the community? That's my question.
And I appreciate your question. And at this point in time, our council does not have a formal position because we are waiting to hear more information from TC Energy. And as everyone knows, this is not our decision. It does lie with DND. But as time goes forward and we have a balanced level of information, I know it will be something that we will continue to discuss around this table.
Can I just add to that?
Of course.
So, if, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I won't take up any more of your time, I'm sorry.
No, if you recall what you wish to ask us, please send us an email. Okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, we will move forward to council inquiries, and I'll ask around the table if anyone has any questions for staff at this point in time. Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. This would be to Mr. Chapman or to Tory. We have seen in the last little while some very violent activity with the surge of water. We've all went down, we've all seen how Mother Nature has taken away shoreline. It's left concrete sidewalks suspended in the air. It has left pipes exposed that need to be covered for winter. And the first thing I would like to say is I know that our municipal staff are doing what they can, when they can, to mitigate that. But my question is, there was something circulated about the park and the playground equipment that because of safety, it would be blocked off. Could we have some further comment on that? Because we went through a big, huge deal last winter, and for the public to understand what's going on with our beaches.
Certainly through the deputy mayor, the parks and facility staff are actually diligently working today at trying to cordon off all of Fred Raper Park, right back to the kind of the main parking area, because it's just simply not safe for the public. We've had as much as a foot of debris washed up in that whole area, and there's no way for us to try and clean it up before the winter. So that park will be effectively locked off for the whole winter, and then we'll try and go in and actually reinstate the park in the spring. The other facilities that we've got right now, Memorial Park, seen a lot of erosion. We had quite a bit of snow fence across a number of those areas. It's going to be, the same. We're just going to push the fence back an extra 10 or 15 feet to try and keep people away from the edge. And as far as David Johnson Park, there really isn't any significant immediate threat to the public at the majority of that park, with the exception of the areas where the picnic tables were on the cement pads that have now significantly undermined. So we'll block those off with the fencing, but the rest of that park will remain open. So the only, at this stage of the game at least, the only park space that we have that will be off line for the whole winter will be Fred Raper Park. The rest of it will still remain open.
Okay, any other questions at this point in time? Tori?
Through your deputy mayor, I have a report that I will be providing more information later in this council meeting with regards to some of the shoreline erosion that's affected our road and buried municipal infrastructure. So I'll provide that, and then you can, if you have any other questions, I can answer them then.
Okay, and seeing no other council inquiries at this point in time, we'll move forward to item 8 on our agenda, motions and bylaws for decision, of which we have none today. Our consent agenda, we have one item, COR 2019-09-2020/21 MTO Connecting Links Program Application. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to put this on the table. Councillor Vickers and Councillor Greenfield, is there any discussion on this item? And if not, I'll ask for an all in favor to move forward with this. Thank you. Okay, items for consideration. DEV 2019-08, amending site plan approval and agreement, Plan 309, Lot 1042, being 46 Trowbridge Street West, and bylaw 2019-80, interim site plan approval and amending site plan agreement. A mover and a seconder to put this on the table, please. Councillor Kentner and Councillor Bell. And over to you, Rob, to give us information on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. As Council may recall, earlier in the year we provided site plan approval with a related agreement for the development of 46 Trowbridge Street West into its 2-story ground floor commercial with 2 apartments above. As the individual commenced the construction, we discovered that there was constraints with regard to the storm system out on the road for him to connect into at this time. Following that, we worked with him in developing some interim measures that could be put in place to allow him to continue and develop his property until such time as we were able to deal with the roadworks out in front. As opposed to just telling him that he had to wait for us. So we worked through some interim measures that the parties were able to agree to, and this amending agreement incorporates those interim measures and allows him to proceed with his development.
Thank you, and I would like to commend planning staff for working with this individual and coming up with that opportunity for him to proceed. Is there any discussion on this matter? Seeing none, then I'll ask for an all in favor. Thank you. And we will move into Committee of the Whole. May I have a mover and a seconder to move into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Greenfield, Councillor Bell, thank you. Okay, and the first item, a recommendation being resolved that the municipality of Meaford hereby go into the Committee of the Whole at 15:23 p.m. And the first item is from our CAO 2019-022, the TC Energy Update. A mover and a seconder, please, to put this on the table. Councillor Vickers and Councillor Kentner. And over to you, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I'll go through in fair detail the report, explaining the purpose of the report as requested by Council was to give them an update on what we have received to date, some initial discussions with them, the scope of the approval process, including public consultation opportunities, as well as a summary of concerns that we have received to date. This started in late February 2019 when staff attended a meeting with TC Energy where they made us aware of a potential development of a pump storage facility at the base. At that point in time, it was very clear that they were still in the process of seeking approval from DND to proceed, and until they reached that access agreement with DND, there was no project. It was more just a heads up of the potential. On June 6th, we actually received the formal correspondence from Department of National Defense, which indicated that they have granted TC Energy a 1-year access agreement for them to go in and review the possibility of the pump storage facility on the Department of National Defense lands. it was very clear that the temporary access agreement does not mean that the proposed hydroelectric facility has been approved to move forward. Verbally, they indicated to us that not only do they have to study the feasibility themselves, they have to prove to Department of National Defense that what they're proposing to do on the lands will in no way interfere with the Department of National Defense's both current operations plus their long-term proposed operations on the base. And that will be the consideration given over this one-year temporary access agreement. The letter also noted quite a multiple layers of approval required for this development, as well as many opportunities for consultation. The original letter requested quite a quick turnaround on comments of July 9th, 2019. That was subsequently extended to March 31st, 2020. In response to that letter, we felt that we needed to get something on the record. So we did send a letter to Department of National Defense highlighting that we were interested in the potential impact on municipal roads, area residents, housing for temporary workers, and transmission line details, amongst other matters. The letter also noted the high importance of public consultation going forward. We also note that the TC Energy or Department of National Defense also reached out to cottagers associations, and we're aware that the group did form Save Georgian Bay, as Mr. Buck had mentioned. That group was formed following becoming aware of the project. We always like to highlight that although the lands fall within the municipality boundaries, we have no jurisdiction for any approvals. We are only a commenting agency in this regard. We'll likely be a little more involved in transmission corridors if they run through our municipality to get where they need to go, if it's applicable. In the report, we've highlighted, we went through all of the public comments that we've received to date and highlighted those issues that have been raised as concerns, and recognizing that. We know that council's being asked to take a position at this time. It's a position of staff that until the proposal is given the clearance by D&D to proceed to the formal regulatory process under two environmental assessment acts, both the Ontario one and the federal one, that it's premature to take a formal position. We would note that subsequent process will include public meetings as well as detailed studies addressing applicable concerns raised as part of the initial consultation process. We also need to highlight that a lot of these studies that come forward in the formal approval process will be quite technical in nature. An environmental impact study that will be prepared by a biologist, which the municipality does not have on staff. Shoreline studies that would need to be prepared by a fluvial geomorphologist, again, which we would never have on staff and would need to utilize the resources. In this regard, it is recommended that the municipality retain peer review consultants to review these applicable studies and provide advice to council on the appropriateness of these studies and the impacts. This is quite a common practice that the municipality undertakes with any development proposal that does require approval, where we hire peer review consultants to review submissions from proponents for development. We highlighted the public consultation is a priority, even went so far as to have advised on the type of consultation. Typically, environmental assessment processes, you have public information sessions where people drop in. We have suggested to them, based on our experience, more recently with Memorial Park, that when people come to a public information session, they want a presentation. So we have relayed that, and I understand that they intend to do that. And they have selected a date and have booked the Meaford Community Centre to host that. And notification of that will first appear in the Meaford Independent this week. But it's December the 11th at the Meaford Community Centre. They just advised us of that following the report being published. We are of the opinion that we should carry out our own public consultation exercise, including public meetings, if the process moves to the formal approval process, together with those background studies. They can form the position of this municipality to both the federal government and TC Energy, and for that matter, the provincial ministries with regard to the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. We will obtain feedback through those public sessions that we undertake as our commenting period. So just in summary, in the consultation communications, we have also provided the link to TC Energy site for comments. We are retaining all comments in a repository so that will form part of our review and consideration going forward. It's interesting to note that we initially were concerned about the lack of consultation on behalf of TC Energy over the last little bit. And recently we were made aware that due to the federal election, they were constrained in providing any consultation on the proposal until after the federal election because energy is a federal matter and they were told they cannot speak to any matters that may impact the election. Now they are fully engaged and intend to be communicating much more directly with the public and the municipality going forward. So as a recommendation in the report, we're recommending that council direct staff, or the committee whole recommend council direct staff to bring back a report prior to the March deadline that would be a comprehensive list of matters that the municipality is looking to be addressed as part of the formal approval process, should it proceed. Direct staff to retain the appropriate consultants to peer review the applicable detailed reports if the project moves forward, and then also hold a public meeting prior to the submission of any municipal comments as part of the formal approval process.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, and I'm sure everyone will have questions, but I'll just begin with one. In relation to the peer review consultants, would it be our expectation the municipality would pay for those, or we would expect that TC Energy would ante up for those costs?
Typically, on a normal development approval process, the proponent pays for our peer review. Because we have no formal approval process, it's not a given that they would pay for it. We will seek what they call intervenor funding or review funding from them. We have not done that yet because we haven't got to that stage if we were to proceed, but we would seek that. If that doesn't work out, we'll also be looking to the County of Grey to see if they could assist us, because this is not only a municipal issue, it's also a regional issue, county issue, so we'd also seek out potential funding from the county should it move to the approval process.
Thank you. I'll open things up for questions. Councillor Kentner.
Has there been a time set for that Wednesday, December 11th meeting?
I believe it's 7 o'clock, but I'm not sure. I don't have the formal notification. It'll be in the paper this week. I haven't received. They just indicate that it would be on the December the 11th. I think it was. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'd like to take this opportunity to, first, I want to thank you, Rob, for providing a report to Council laying out a timeline. The initial contact is not an uncommon thing to happen to senior members of staff where someone wishes to do something in our municipality and senior staff engage just to have an understanding of just what might be on the horizon. There's something that I've learned being on council, that the vast majority of things that transpire inside the municipality often never make it to council's desk. Now this particular timeline, and I want you, Mr. Armstrong, if I state something wrong, most definitely correct me, because I believe in stating things which are accurate. So you opened up this evening and said that early contact was made in late February, and then the timeline is that June the 6th, there was communications that the Department of National Defense had granted this look-see, this access agreement on May the 21st. So the D&D had granted this one-year agreement to TC Energy, and the municipality of Meaford through your office and through the system here at the municipality, were notified on June the 6th. The last meeting, there was a lady, and that lady's probably in the audience today, I mean, a very concerned individual, said, and I took by the tone of voice that it was as if council was hiding something from the general ratepayers. And the question was, when was council aware of this proposal? Mr. Armstrong, I'm going to state the date that I, being one of 3 people, at 2 o'clock on June the 17th, was brought into a room, and I was made aware with 2 other councillors. And we did that so that we would not have a group of councillors, being 4, to have a closed session, which is illegal, to forward the business of a municipality. So to that lady who asked that question, to be quite honest, council was the last to know. And I just wanted to say that so that the people have an understanding of where we are. So as the deputy mayor acting as the seat of the mayor has said, we have questions. And for a councillor to be on the end of that list from a group, I'm not putting a gold star there. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Councillor Bell, as I was in that room with you on June 17th, and I'll just take this opportunity to share that we as council have all received many, many emails in relation to this proposal. And I can only speak for myself now to say that I've certainly read every one. I've engaged in several meetings with residents. I've had phone conversations. I attended the Citizens Forum in Thornbury because I was going to be away when the meeting was held in Meaford. And I have heard that presentation from Save Georgian Bay. And I think I understand the feeling of most of you as our residents. You're worried and you're fearful of what this pump storage facility might bring to our community should it be approved, how it might change or impact Georgian Bay. And know that I share those concerns, and they're valid for sure. And I'm pleased to know that TC Energy has set a date for this public meeting. I hope you'll all be there and you'll bring your friends and neighbors, and that they will be able to provide answers to our questions at that point in time. And on the other side of that, I have met with representatives from TC as well, and have asked them some questions. And I can share that they are, as Mr. Armstrong said, responding with that this is very, very early in their process. And they don't have the answers to those questions at this point in time. But hopefully, since we're all, I think, pretty much on the same page with wondering about the fish and impacts to the shoreline and property values and so on, that they will be prepared with answers for those questions at the meeting that's upcoming on December the 11th. So know that we are equally concerned and that we will be there, and that we look forward to your questions at that point in time. Anything else from council? Councillor Greenfield.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Firstly, I wasn't at that meeting on June 17th, wasn't aware of it. Thank you, Rob, for your report. A lot of good facts. I don't like to sound cynical, but TC Energy has known about a multitude of public concerns. I'm going to say since August. I'm going to throw out August. I'm very pleased because I've been asking for them to come and hold a public forum for a month or two. Very pleased they've finally decided the 11th of December, 2 weeks before Christmas. Can you interpret anything into that? Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Greenfield. And I share your concern on December the 11th. And having talked with representatives from TC, I think to Mr. Armstrong's point, they were unable for 6 weeks to move forward with any work on this project. So I don't know why December the 11th. We certainly suggested that weather is unpredictable at that point in time. It could be unpredictable this week. But in any event, at least they're coming. So we'll try to stay on the positive side. Any other comments from council? Councillor Bell.
Madam Mayor, or Madam Deputy Mayor, so the issue which is before council this afternoon about directing staff to bring back a report, I'm in favor of that. And reading through the details that was prepared, it is some very, very, very technical details that are going to be required. And the number 2 item about hiring an appropriate consultant for the peer review, I'm in full favor of that, because there are things that geologists and everybody's going to be talking about that are going to be just way above any member of our staff or planning department, way outside. And I'm in favor of having that. We need to know every detail that we possibly can to be fully informed as much as we can, and the public meeting. So I'm going to be voting in favor of 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, and if there's no other discussion, then I agree. We will support these recommendations, so I'll ask for an all in favor of accepting this report as presented by Mr. Armstrong. Oh, good. Thank you. And next on our agenda, under Community Services, item number COM 2019-08, the Recurring Booking Discount Policy. I'll ask for a move and a seconder to put that on the table. Councillor Vickers and Councillor Greenfield, thank you. And I believe, Mr. Smith, you were going to share this report with us.
I absolutely am. This report comes out of a council direction from back in February or March of this year, which was related to the 2019 budget process. At that time, Council expressed some concerns about the cost of using municipal facilities for various groups and passed a motion directing us to look into a report and a policy about creating a discount for those groups that have recurring bookings. And the motion defined recurring bookings as 10 times in a calendar year, and it talked about a 20% discount. So what you've got in front of you today is that proposed policy, and we're recommending that that policy goes forward. And what I've tried to do here in the report is give council a real picture on what the impacts would be, both for the groups involved and for the municipality itself. As you roll down onto page 3 of the report, we talk about impacted groups, and there's somewhere in the region of 25 groups there, or individuals, and it totals somewhere in the region of 1,600 hours a year across all of our facilities, because of course this would apply to the arena and ice time, it would apply to the ball diamonds, it would apply to Meaford Hall rentals, and so on and so forth. The total income from all of these bookings in 2018 was about $82,000, because I think it's important that we remember at this stage that the majority of our bookings in our facilities are recurring bookings. You know, whether it be the Knights of Meaford or minor baseball or the Rotary Club at Meaford Hall, the people that are there regularly are the people that sort of bring a large amount of our income. The original motion didn't distinguish between different rates or different groups. It just talked about anybody who books more than 10 times in a year. So the policy that you've got before you today doesn't distinguish between that either. About 28% of the bookings that we're talking about here are what we class as commercial rate. Those are the people that pay full freight because they are in it for a business, or they are not a community group, they're private individuals. So that would include people like the Meaford Knights, that's obviously a business there. It would include things like privately organised hockey leagues on a regular basis, or privately organised slow pitch nights. The rest of it are all community rates. So those are groups that we as a municipality have defined as providing a service to the community that are open to everybody. And so they already receive a discounted rate through the fees and charges. And those community rates for both Meaford Hall and for the community centre and arena have been calculated on a cost recovery basis. So where right now we talk about the terrace room at Meaford Hall, for a 4-hour booking there, it's a $60 charge. That $60 is what it costs us to have the building open for that group to be there. Ice time is different to that. Our ice time, even for commercial rates, is significantly less than full cost recovery. Running an arena and running an ice surface is a very, very expensive business. And we estimate that our rates are probably about a quarter of full cost recovery on that already. So we are losing a lot of money, or that we are subsidizing a lot of that activity. The policy proposes that all groups receive a 20% discount if they have more than 10 bookings in a year or 10 bookings in a single ice season. Obviously, when we run ice from late October through till March, we don't want to talk about calendar years because that period is the period that groups are booking for. Where this becomes a little more complicated is that councillors previously approved a variety of discounts for individual groups, and those discounts run the gamut of being 5 to 10% all the way up to 100%. So under this policy, all of those ad hoc discounts will be eliminated and all groups would have a 20% discount. That obviously has a lot of benefits for the municipality, because all of our staff would understand exactly what the policy is. It would have a benefit for the community, because it would mean that every group is being treated the same, rather than some groups feeling like they are benefiting from each other. And I think it would have a benefit for council as well, because then council wouldn't be dealing with ad hoc requests from groups at various times. When we talk about a discount, and we've established over the last couple of years what we call the community funding budget code within the council operating budget, it's important to note that any discount here would be applied as a cost to council under that community funding grant. And that's precisely because these charges are set at fee recovery rates. Many of our facilities, and Meaford Hall being sort of the key one of these, have been under great pressure in recent years to reduce the taxpayer subsidy and to cover their costs. If by passing a discount policy that suddenly meant that Meaford Hall reduced their income by $20,000, then it wouldn't be fair on the members of staff and the facility to make it look like that facility was losing $20,000 more than it actually is. So that charge of $20,000, or what we actually estimate would be about $36,000 in total, would be funded out of the community funding budget. In reality, we're already at about $32,000 being funded out of the community funding budget for things like minor hockey and so on. So the additional cost because of this policy is relatively limited at approximately $4,000. The other part of the motion back in March was that we should consult with community groups as we develop this policy. And so what I am proposing today is that normally, Committee of the Whole would debate this today, and if you pass it, it would come to Council at the next meeting on November the 18th. What I propose that we do instead for this particular policy is that Committee of the Whole debates today and makes a decision, and if Committee of the Whole recommends that we enact this policy, we will then write to all of these groups that are currently affected saying, here's the direction that Council have provided in March and again in November, here's the impact that it would have on your group, whether or not they had an ad hoc discount or not, and then provide those groups with the opportunity of giving feedback either to the council@meaford.ca email address or by coming to council in either of the next two meetings to make their case. And then council would make their final decision on December the 2nd. That would give us 4 weeks worth of consideration of the community groups and the public's feelings about this, instead of the normal 2 weeks, because of course by the time we get letters out to them it's going to be the end of the week and then they won't have an awful lot of time to meet as a group and give their feedback. Doing that on December the 2nd would still easily give us enough time to make any budgetary changes. It will certainly fit in with next year's fees and charges, which won't be approved until the January meeting, and we can move forward in that sense. With that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, no questions around the table. Councillor Kentner?
Just a statement. I mean, we are damned if we do and damned if we don't in this scenario. And I think that I think the staff recommendation that we float this by the groups is a good one. I think that we have to have some kind of standard policy for everybody. And I think also that you've said in the report that this supports our our efforts to, support the community. And it is community groups at the heart of this, and I think that we're doing the right thing. It's, as I say, there will be some people who won't like it and some who will.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keaveney. There will be those who will be very much hurt by this. And when we look at the package that we received, there are some who receive 100%, and they are a vital part of our community and what our community means. And we just say, we love you doing this, we want you to do this, and we're behind you with no charge. And some of these groups are going to be faced with coming back to this council and saying, we can't function. We're going to hear that. They're going to say this is going to be such a hardship on us. And I'm going to ask, would these groups in the future who come back and say that we're trying to do this and we're failing miserably, people count on us and we can't deliver, will they be able to come back to this podium and ask this council, can you make an exception for us, followed by the next, followed by the next, and followed by the next? Because if I was one of those groups affected badly, I would want to come to this podium.
For you, Deputy Mayor, I absolutely acknowledge that there are a couple of groups in here that have very large discounts or complete fee waivers. That is something that we, at least in theory, as a municipality and as a council, decided to move away from 3 or 4 years ago, and there are some of these sort of hanger-on groups in that sort of sense. I will say that at least one of the groups that has 100% discount, I am led to believe that there is a relatively big reserve fund that they have of their own that would at least keep them going for some period of time, but it is an impact. If council were to pass this policy, and if a group were to come forward and ask for something different to the policy, I think you all know exactly what I'm about to say, which is I believe that council should stick to the policy. However, council currently and in the past has decided to depart from policy on some occasions. As you say, Councillor Bell, if you do that with one, then we end up with this long list of ad hoc variations on within a year or two. The one other option that I think that council may like to consider is that we have a very small amount of money still set aside in the community bursary programme for the remainder of the term of council. When council made the decision to hold back a small portion of that $50,000 annual budget earlier in the year, the idea was that it would be for new groups coming forward during the term of council. If council wished to, they could consider an application from a Good Food Box or a VON or a minor baseball to at least offset some of these charges through that community bursary programme. That's a decision that council made. There is, I think it's somewhere in the region of $1,500 to $2,000 that's left in the annual budget. It doesn't cover all of these costs by any stretch of the imagination, but it would be something as an option.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers.
Through your worship, I guess, I think our intent of bringing this forward was, we hear from certain individuals that, it's too expensive to rent the hall. That, we can go down to Thornbury, rent the hall and, don't have to, we have, don't have to pay for the bartenders. There's, it's just not a simple sort of sentence question or answer sort of thing. So like, I understand why we were doing this, but I just don't know whether we've got to where we want to be. And like, if you go to page 4 of 6, it says, so applying the 20% discount to those in charge would cost the municipality $36,000, resulting in the user group paying a total of $92,000. Staff estimates the income received from these groups in 2018, followed the ad hoc discounts discussed above, was approximately $96,000. So like Councillor Bell said, this isn't really getting us where we want to be, and I'm not too sure whether this is the right vehicle. I appreciate the time that staff put into it. I just don't know whether where we want to be, because I see some of the people that do receive a fairly hefty discount. These are very good. These are good community groups, and we as a community need good community groups. So I think we should support them. So to have, I know maybe minor baseball does have reserves. I'm not too sure whether that was who you were talking about. It doesn't really matter though in a way because it is what it is. But baseball is one of those things. If you can keep it relatively cheap, more people will partaketh, and that's really what we want done. We want our facilities used as green space. We want people to use them. So, I'm struggling, unless I'm misunderstanding this, I'm struggling having the ability to support the recommendation as brought forward today.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I thank Councillor Vickers for the comments. I think it's a really valuable one. This report is designed around the direction that Council gave earlier in the year, and no, it doesn't add more money particularly to the subsidies that go to our various community groups. I think the benefit of doing it in this manner is that it applies those subsidies evenly to all groups rather than supporting one ahead of another. Because, to be honest, if I was one of the other groups and I see this report and I look at this list, well, I'm going to be back in 2 weeks regardless to say, well, if they get an 80% discount, then I should get an 80% discount, and then we'll be a long way down the road. There is a completely other path that Council can take, which is to significantly reduce the fees and charges for community rates within our facilities. That has a direct consequence, though, and it's convenient that we're doing this on the day that we've talked about the draft budget. If you reduce the community rates at the arena, at the community centre and Meaford Hall by 50% to make it easier for community groups to access those facilities, then the revenue projections in that budget will go down by 50%, which means that the tax increase will go up by 8.5%, not 7.7%. So these are the very difficult trade-offs that come with this.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I've thought about something similar and wondered if we marketed something of that nature really, really well, what increase might we expect in the use of those facilities?
And this is a really funny one. It would be an awful thing to do. Yeah. Because if we reduce our rates to 50% of cost recovery and we market it to get more people in the building, then we're losing more money every single time.
Yeah, it really is a no-win, but I think that's why public engagement is so important on this, is that we allow the groups an opportunity to participate in the discussion. I wanted to ask a question about one of the groups that isn't on the list, and that would be the Meaford Culture Foundation, because I believe they still receive a room at Meaford Hall for no charge, and I'm wondering if they should be on the list and if they would fall into a category then of, if this was adopted, of a fee minus 20%.
Through your worship, I think not. The room that the Meaford Culture Foundation receive at the hall is an office space, and we have a number of arrangements with various groups for office space, or the Midas Mart, or storage at Woodford Hall, or now performance venue at Woodford Hall. I think those are different to individual facility rentals. Yeah, the Beautiful Joe group have a very low-cost lease for some space, office space at Meaford Hall. I think a lease like that for space on an ongoing basis is very distinct from, I want to book an hour's worth of ice time 10 times in a year.
Yes, I understand, because I know as I looked at the list, I thought there's a lot of groups here that aren't mentioned, and if you go down that rabbit hole, so to speak, then that gets complicated.
This list was compiled by our teams at the arena and at the hall, and it is the list of the people who've had 10 or more separate bookings for rental time over the last 12 months.
I appreciate that, and I think too, in relation to ice time, we do want to remain competitive, because we just went through that a couple of years ago with losing some of our teams to ice time in Thornbury. So how do we work within what's being proposed here to make sure that we are still offering that competitive advantage? So again, I think we need to hear from the public organizations on this. Mr. Chapman.
Through Deputy Mayor, I think it's important, that was the one that I was actually going to bring up, is talking about competitiveness, because our ice rates right now really aren't competitive. for minor sports. They are approximately $25 to $35 less expensive than any of our other comparators. So Owen Sound, Georgian Bluffs, Grey Highlands, Chatsworth, they're all somewhere around $105 to $115 an hour for minor rates, and we are at $75. So, I mean, if we're considering rates going down to help out some, but part of it is also making sure that we're competitive, then if rates should go up, rates should also go up. And that's the flip-flop of this. I mean, we talk about baseball. I mean, I know a number of adults who play in the slow pitch leagues. Their annual fee to play baseball for the entire season, depending on the team that you're on, so in reality, whether they get charged for a beer fund or not, is somewhere between $20 and $40 for the season for an adult to play baseball. I mean, right now I can go and play, I play hockey 2 or 3 times a week, and depending on who I play with, it's between $5 and $10 for a skate, depending on the number of people that come out. So, when we're talking about all these things, we really need to break it down. I mean, I think of some of these organizations. When I was up north, I was part of the Lions Club, and I paid an annual fee of $40 to Lions International, which was my membership fee, but I also paid $200 to the club because that was my share of the cost of the Lions Den, because we rented space. So all the Lions members paid that so that we could meet on a bi-weekly basis. So I don't understand why that type of a process has got lost in a community like this, where just because you're a volunteer, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay your fair share for the space that you use to get out that. What's the difference between doing that or going and watching a movie with your spouse? That's part of your entertainment, doing those things. Or if you're going to eat somewhere, what's wrong with paying an appropriate rate for that? So I think that there does need to be a balance here, and to Matt's comments, the reason for doing it this way was that if we want to provide a discount, it should be applied equally. I mean, and council provided direction. The direction was not make sure that everybody gets at least a 20% discount or greater if they're already getting greater, right? It was 20% discount because there is a thought in the community that we do not provide enough. When in reality, when you look at a report like this, we are already providing significant discounts to a number of organizations.
Through the Deputy Mayor, just to add to that, as a comparator to Darcy's baseball comment, I pay at least $150 a year for a summer season of soccer in Owen Sound, which has more players and less maintenance, and yet it's $100 more than people are paying for baseball in Meaford.
Are there any more comments from council? Councillor Kentner?
I do think that 100% discount is kind of, it makes it very difficult for people who are paying a rate. You know what I mean? So I think we would have to, if you're going to alter this plan, I think you got to take a look, and everybody would have to get somewhat the same treatment. There doesn't seem to be a lot fair about some groups having 100% discount and others 36% or a 20%.
And I think there's truth to that. If you look at organizations like the Rotary Club, which just donated a $6,500 projector and screen to the terrace room for Meaford Hall, and yet, they pay for their space as well. So I think this is a report that I'd like to see us really take some time with, not rush it. I know you're suggesting a month. I'm not sure that's enough time, Mr. Smith. I really think this is something that we want to hear from the organizations on that list in particular. We want to hear from them, and we want time to deliberate it. So I'm going to suggest there be some flexibility in that date.
Absolutely. If we wanted more time, my recommendation would be to go as far as December the 16th, which is the last meeting before Christmas. The reason I'd say that is that we intend to bring forward fees and charges, well, at the next meeting, the draft version, but the bylaw would be passed at the same time as the budgets are passed early in January. And of course, part of the conditions of this policy are that the groups enter into a contract rather than calling up today and saying I want a booking next week and then calling up that week and saying I want a booking the week after, that we map out the booking dates for the year. And so I wouldn't want groups to enter into that contract in January and then us have to sort of go back and change the fees afterwards and do refunds and so on and so forth.
Just as a follow-up to that as well, I think it's important to note if you're going to give a discount, we would be requiring the organizations to enter into a contract to establish all of the dates and then live by those dates, and you will pay for them whether you use them or not, unless it is an inclement weather issue. Because right now, a number of organizations book everything, and then at the last minute, if there's not enough people coming, or they've decided that they're going somewhere else, or it's somebody's birthday, so they're just going to go as a group instead of going play ice hockey or whatever the case may be, they'll cancel with 24 hours notice and there's no penalty for them. This, you enter into a proper contract, you pay for every single event. There is no cancellation.
And I'll edit that ever slightly and say that one of the other reports that Darcy's group and my group will be bringing forward, and again I hope before Christmas, is a formal cancellation policy. Because right now as a municipality we have no policy about facility bookings, which says, you know, if you just cancel the day before you get your money back or you don't have to pay. But we also have no cancellation policy about summer camp registrations or swimming lessons or anything else along those lines. So that's something that we'll be bringing forward, and the policy is drafted in such a way that any booking for the year, changes to that would have to comply with the forthcoming cancellation policy.
Councillor Greenfield.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keating, and thank you, gentlemen, for for your answers. I'm just wondering, the Meaford Community Theatre now is operating out of Woodford Hall, and I understand they have a contract there for, I don't know if it's 3 years or not. Early comments seems to be things are working well with that contract. Would it be more advisable to try to entice other groups into, not into Woodford Hall necessarily, but into signing a contract similar to what the theatre has?
Through the Deputy Mayor, I think they're different cases. When we talk about these bookings, we are talking about contracts, but we're talking about contracts for regular ice time, whereas the Woodford Hall arrangement is about, to a certain extent, exclusivity and constant use. So I would tie that theatre group agreement in much more closely to the Culture Foundation or the Beautiful Joe group, where it's an isolated lease agreement. This policy would apply to Woodford, but only for those additional bookings that agreement still allows for. So if, for whatever reason, a new group wanted to go and use Woodford Hall every Monday morning when the theatre group isn't there, that agreement allows for that, providing the theatre group has enough notice, and then this policy would apply to those ad hoc ones. So I don't think agreements like that would help in this situation, because we're not offering exclusivity or free access. We're talking about booked ice time or ball diamond time or meeting time.
Okay, any other questions or comments at this point in time? Okay, is council comfortable with potentially extending until December 16th for a final review of this? Okay, then I'll ask for an all in favor. Okay, and against? Paul? Just go back to the way things were? Yeah, well, that will be one of the options when we get to December 16th. Okay. Moving forward to infrastructure services. Agenda item INF 2019-02, emergency bridge remediation. May I have a mover to put this on a table, and the seconder, Councillor Bell and Councillor Kentner. And I'm going to call upon our new director, Ms. Perry Maybedaw. How did I do?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Very, very well. Perfect pronunciation. Okay, so this report touches on some emergency bridge remediation that was required. So during the summer of 2019, staff became aware of damages to existing bridge infrastructure at 3 different locations. Included in these are on June 13, 2019, staff identified a section of guardrail on the 11th line between the 4th Side Road and Euphrasia St. Vincent Town Line that was damaged. It appeared that the damage was caused by a car accident, but there was no longer any vehicle at the site, but there was the damage to the guardrail. In addition to this, there was additional guardrail damage that occurred on July 4th, 2019. A vehicle pulling a trailer was in a single vehicle accident, causing damage to the roadway and the guardrail on Sydenham Lakeshore Drive between Side Road 23 and Gray Road 15. The vehicle and the trailer ended up in Kiefer Creek, which resulted in gasoline leaking into the creek, and spill kits were used at the mouth of the creek to Georgian Bay to contain the contamination. So these 2 locations, because the damage was identified in close timing to each other, we actually got a contractor who completed the work together. The work was required to meet guidelines identified in the roadside safety manual and to provide safety to road users. And then the 3rd location, it's a bit of a different situation. So the 3rd location is on Euphrasia St. Vincent Town Line between 11th Line and Gray Road 12. So there's damage to Bridge 145. The north barrier of the bridge has fallen into the watercourse. The damage was identified during our 2019 OSIM inspection completed by Ainley Group and resulted in the report identifying immediate replacement of the bridge. Just to give some background, the 2017 OSIM identified replacement in 3 to 5 years. However, due to this damage, we now are required to do the replacement immediately. And the OSIM report identified that if the bridge is not replaced within the next year, then alternatively it needs to be closed. As Grey Highlands is responsible for maintenance of this section of road, they have been working with another engineering firm that has provided a short-term solution to allow the bridge to remain open for an additional 3 to 5 years before complete replacement of the bridge. This will allow for enough time to complete the required studies and design of a bridge structure and acquire funds for the project. The temporary solution involves installing a structural slab over the existing bridge structure and installing a new guide rail system on both ends of the bridge. Grey Highlands will be completing the work in conjunction with contractors. In Grey Highlands, staff took a report to council on October 2nd, which has been passed. So the cost to complete the work were not identified in the 2019 budget allocation as the damaged infrastructure was not foreseen and resulted or assumed to have been resulted from vehicle accidents. The costs for the work on Bridge 145 will be cost shared 50-50 split with Grey Highlands due to the boundary road commitments. And all costs associated with the 3 emergency repairs will be funded from the Bridge and Structures Reserve Fund. So our recommendation is that the Committee of the Whole direct staff to fund the necessary emergency bridge remediation works from the Bridge and Structure Reserve Fund.
Thank you, Tori. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Greenfield.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kimi. Thank you, Tori. Concerning Bridge 145, the bridge that had the guardrail knocked off into the creek, interesting Burnside's recommendation about placing this slab over the bridge. Now, it's a short-term fix, but I'm just wondering if a slab could be placed over a bridge for a short term to rectify the problem. Could a slab be built to place over an existing bridge for a long-term solution? Do you think that could be done?
It depends on the situation. So when you're placing a slab over a bridge, you're not replacing the abutments of the bridge. So it depends on the condition of those abutments, as well as the slab itself. We haven't been working with Burnside, but my understanding is that the slab isn't built for long-term use. So the reason why the costs are lower than a full replacement of the bridge is because the materials being used allow for a 3 to 5 year lifespan and not further than that.
Thank you. Good question, Councillor Greenfield. I wondered, and I know it's not true because it's not in the report, but I was just curious about our municipal insurance. It doesn't come into play for a vehicle hitting one of our bridges. How does that work?
Through the deputy mayor, so on the Kiefer Creek project, we are going to be making a claim, but that's not to say that we'll be successful. The deductible for our policy is $25,000. So if we can't recover from the third party on the Kiefer Creek one, then we can't, and there's no point then going through our insurance because neither one of these is worth $25,000. We didn't spend that much money, so there'd be no point. It would just heighten our claims experience without actually giving us any money back because it's less than the deductible.
That makes sense. Any other questions from council? Then I'll ask for an all in favor to accept this report as presented. Thank you. And we'll move on to INF 2019-03, shoreline erosion. A mover and a seconder, please, to put this on the table. Councillors Vickers and Kentner. And back to you, Tori.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So this report is timely considering the storm that we had last week. I clearly prepared this report prior to that, so the information in it is from the previous two storm events that occurred. But to give a little bit of background information, Georgian Bay, as a large bay of Lake Huron, has experienced increasing water levels throughout the summer of 2019 and continuing into the fall, as recorded by the Government of Canada. So the water levels have been recorded to be approximately 77 centimeters above historical averages and over a third of a meter higher than the same time last year. So this report highlights damages related to two storm events and doesn't include the storm event we had last week, but additional damage has occurred since then. This report identifies damages and remediation work related to municipal buried infrastructure and roadways, but we've also had damage in Memorial Park and also to our parks in different areas of the municipality. So the first incident resulted in exposure of a water main along the private road allowance on Lakeside Avenue. This work, the shoreline was eroded, exposing the water main. Our concerns were that if we left it, when temperatures drop, that water main could freeze, then having residents without access to municipal water. Remediation work was completed after that exposed water main was identified to us by a resident, and now there is shoreline protection in that area to prevent any further erosion in that one isolated area. However, there's other sections along that private road allowance that could be a concern in the future. The second incident resulted in significant shoreline erosion along both Lakeshore Road and Lakeside Avenue. Grace Auble Conservation Authority issued a wave warning on October 16th, 2019. The warning resulted from a combination of higher than average lake levels and the strong winds forecasted from the north. The warning was issued as a significant shoreline flooding was expected as there was a potential for 2.5 meter high waves. So following that event, we saw significant erosion along those two road sections. The erosion actually caused the shoreline to now be right against our roadway in several locations. Luckily, we had no further exposure of any of our buried infrastructure. However, we did complete emergency restoration work following both of those incidents and funded through the surplus operating budgets where available and reserve funds for all additional required funding. And as discussed earlier, there's been some additional damages to Memorial Park, and also our staff in the Parks and Facilities Department are working to deal with some damages following last week's wave event.
Thank you, Tori. Any questions from council? Tori, I'm wondering about a couple of things. One, you mentioned that Not Construction was brought in to do this work. Was that a single source, or was there no time, I gather, to put out a tender?
Yeah, it was a single sourced. Between those two, the storm event last week and the storm event that originally caused the damage to our shoreline, there was less than 2 weeks between. So we were actually able to get the work done before last week's wave warning, which allowed the shoreline to be protected during that event.
And I'm wondering if you can speak to the situation for residents. We know residents have potentially had damages to their properties, and how might they best proceed? Mr. Armstrong, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I can, Deputy Mayor. So we actually just released a media release out to the media. It will be on our website. We are monitoring the situation. We've had discussions with Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. We have another meeting tomorrow with our control group to explore options. We're looking at funding for our resources. We are in discussions with them about potential funding for individuals. Key to note there that if funding were available, and we're not saying it is, we're continuing exploring it, but it's only available to people who have it as their permanent residence, not seasonal residents, and only if there's damage to the dwelling or something to the dwelling. If it's just property damage, it's not eligible. So we've asked people to give us that information on the type of damage so that we can monitor it, so that we can report it to municipal affairs and evaluate opportunities in that regard.
Thank you. I wondered also if I could ask about, you mentioned this funding came from the rate stabilization reserve that now had a balance of $173,893 at the end of 2018. I'm just wondering about that rate stabilization reserve. Can you explain, Mr. Chapman, what really is the purpose of that reserve?
Through your worship, for issues like this, where we really don't have money set aside, to deal with it, and it's a one-off thing, so that if we didn't use the rate stabilization reserve, we could end up in deficits or have to carry that deficit or those costs forward into the next year, which would negatively impact the future budgets.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have a hypothetical question, and I'm asking for what are the tools of a municipality if we had a weather event which wiped out a road, dropped a bridge, and we're in real trouble. Can we go to the province of Ontario, plead our case, even though we can show the province that we're looking after our finances as best we can show them that we are concerned about our finances, and yet we've had an event which was out of our control, and it's massive damage. What can a municipality do to plead its case? Because I'm aware of what happened in Chatsworth. It took them a long time and they were flooded out. So what are the tools?
I'm going to give you the full House of Directors on this report and answer that one. There is a couple of different provincial programs to deal with disaster recovery. One is for private residences, and as the CEO mentioned, we are sort of putting out some information about that. The other is specifically for municipal costs. The program is complicated, as all provincial programs are, and as you quite rightly said, the Township of Chatsworth had a fairly difficult experience dealing with it. They were actually the first municipality to deal with the program under its new form, and I think getting themselves through that process was quite a challenge, because really the people at the other end didn't know what the process was either. We have actually been in touch with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs over the last couple of days after the events of last week in particular, because we are concerned about the costs for both protecting our roads and in-ground infrastructure, but also our parks and facilities. And really, the way the program operates is that it is designed for a one-off event. I've had confirmation of that this afternoon, that an ongoing period of regular shoreline erosion because of repeated storms wouldn't qualify under this program. It is for one-off events because it's designed for tornadoes or ice storms or something along those lines. The other criteria is that you have to have spent at least 3% of your own source tax revenue. So for the municipality of Meaford, that is in the region of $450,000. You have to have spent that before you even qualify to be considered for money to come back from the province. As I say, we've talked to various people at the ministry and at the Provincial Emergency Operations Centre over the last few days, and we are currently starting to put together what some of those costs might be from the incident that occurred on Thursday. And should we get to the stage where we have a bit of a closer handle on that, then we would have to come back to council, because you also can't obviously apply for this without a council resolution saying we'd like you to apply for that. So once we have a bit more information on what happened last Thursday and how we can fix it, and to what extent we're able to do that in the short run, then I think we'll have another similar report to the one that you've got in front of you today about earlier in the year, when we can make some decisions about what happens next.
Thank you for that very detailed update, Matt. We appreciate that, because a lot of people are wondering. So thank you. Any other comments from council on this one? Then I'll ask for an all in favor to accept this as presented. Thank you. And we'll hope that we don't see more storms. Moving forward, updates from members appointed to county council committees and local boards. I guess I'm up first with county council. And first of all, I wanted to thank you, Margaret, for including items E, G, H, and I in our communications package. That gives our residents and council members an opportunity to really get up to date on county council. So for that reason, I won't go through all of the items that are mentioned in those minutes. But I would like to take note in relation to the county's comments on the proposed provincial policy statement review, to acknowledge our own Rob Armstrong and Liz Buckton, who were significantly involved in the preparation of comments for the province with the county. And if I may, Margaret, I would encourage you to continue to provide these minutes with our communications. County Council also met at the call of the Warden on October 24th. It was the minutes of the 10th that you had in with our communications. So a couple of things from that meeting. We have some new videos at the county level. There are 4 of them that are really well done, really informative, that can be found on the county website. And those are in relation to housing. It's all about the need for affordable housing. I was going to mention for Councillor Vickers that the Grey County recently purchased 0.2 of an acre of land for an entrance widening purpose for $1,000. So get your arithmetic working on that one. There was yeah. And I know we talked about this last time, Grey Gables, and there was a long and passionate discussion surrounding a recommendation from the county's long-term care committee to move forward with application to the province for 96 extra beds for Grey Gables. It was, as I say, it was good discussion. Some county councillors felt that that application should not go forward till staff had had time to prepare a fulsome report on the implications of adding these beds to Grey Gables. However, the window of opportunity for applying was short. So a recorded vote, ensued, and the vote was 53-37 in favor of moving forward with this application, and I was happy to support the recommendation to move forward to apply for 96 beds for Grey Gables. I'd also like to share that I attended last week a two-day TIO conference. That is the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario conference. A few interesting points that I noted. Tourism is a $34 billion industry in Ontario. That makes it greater than agriculture, forestry, and mining combined. So tourism is huge. Currently, roughly 91,000 tourism jobs are unfilled in Ontario. That's a scary number. And I think one of the ways we can help with that is to work together to promote tourism as a career choice. 53% of Ontario's visitors arrive from the U.S., with now 20% coming from China, 5% from the UK, and the remaining from the rest of the world. And again, at this session, most of the discussion surrounded the need for housing and foreign worker programs. Meaford was nominated for an Ontario Tourism Award of Excellence at the TIO conference for a Big Red Chair tour. We didn't win, but getting to the point of being a finalist was quite an honor. I also attended the Attainable Housing Forum in Wasaga Beach on Friday on behalf of Mayor Klumpus. We heard about the advantage of CIP programs, and it was well recognized in that room that Meaford is a leader with our well-established plan. There was a discussion on housing first strategies, initiatives, as well as roundtables where ideas were brought forward on how to face the challenges of our housing shortage. And I'm wondering if we should consider a housing first strategy here in Meaford as well. There will be 2 more forums in other communities, and the feedback will be gathered from all of those and summarized, and a subsequent report will be distributed, and I'll make sure that Council sees that. Were there any other boards that anyone had meetings on this week? Councillor Greenfield.
Mayor, could I ask a question from your county report? Of course. Going back to Grey Gables, and interesting to see that still a bit of a divisive topic over the county, and that's very unfortunate because anyway, are we looking at another 30 beds at Grey Gables? That will put it up to 96, which would be 3 pods. Is that what you're thinking about applying for?
So the application, Councillor Greenfield, will move forward for 96 beds. The magic number seems to be pods of 32. So the question then becomes, where should Grey Gables be successful in receiving 96 beds? Where would they put them in? The thought was to stack on the additional land that's available to them to perhaps have a 3-story section. But of course, there's no way of knowing if they would be approved for that many beds. It might just be 64, it might just be 32, but they thought, well, let's go for it. Okay, so we will move forward then with a motion to move out of Committee of the Whole. A mover and a seconder, please, Councillor Vickers and Councillor Kentner. Okay, and I'll just ask, is everybody okay, or do you want to take a 2-minute break? Okay to go forward? Yeah, okay, so we'll keep going.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, just a quick vote on coming out of Committee of the Whole, please.
Oh, of course. And I was doing so well. Yes, out of Committee of the Whole, okay. And we will move forward into councillor motions. Are there any notices of motion today? And seeing none, we'll look at motions for decision. The first one, Councillor Bell, the Business Recognition Program. I assume you would so move that. And would there be a seconder? Councillor Vickers, thank you. And Councillor Bell, would you speak to this?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening. I'm hoping, obviously, that my fellow councillors will support this very small initiative. And I know that you've all had opportunity to read this motion. but I would like to read it aloud. So whereas participants in the Economic Development Strategy public consultation process have identified the need to engage local businesses with the municipality, and whereas Council of the Municipality of Meaford has designated strengthening our economy as one of Council's strategic priorities, and whereas Council wishes to celebrate and recognize the businesses operating in the municipality and their contribution to the community, therefore be it resolved that Council of the Municipality of Meaford hereby directs staff to bring forward a business recognition program for Council's consideration, and that the program shall include the provision that all members of Council sign business recognition certificates. Fellow councillors, when we went through this really good and worthy workshop session with McSweeney, and inside the cover, I know you all have copies of this, where it says, "Are we business ready?" And there's a line that says, "And are we being ready for business retention?" And as someone who has a business, I know that it's much harder to go out and find a new client than it is to keep one who is satisfied returning. And I think that as an overarching principle for Council, that by a recognition program to retain businesses inside our municipality with a little thank you and a little recognition of saying you are most valued in our community and we wish to engage with you by a little certificate that says we know you exist and we appreciate you. When I read through the report also that says in the McSweeney report that Meaford had 1,367 businesses as of December 2018. Actually, I was really taken aback by that number because most recently the group that I have for the police, they recognize how many households we have, how many commercial entities we have, how many industrial entities we have. So what that number told me is we have got a lot of businesses which are operating out of home. They're going about doing a service in our community. In most cases, maybe silently, and they're not being recognized, and we're not telling them thank you. And finally, when we read through the report that says the challenges that we face inside our municipality, by bringing forth a little piece of paper that recognizes a business, one that really hit me hard was the number 2 point, which says there was a lack of pride in our community. As a businessman in this community, I am very proud to say that my business is located inside the municipality of Meaford. And as a business, we had a choice where we could locate. And most recently, we affirmed the fact that we wish to locate inside the municipality. So when I read that there was a lack of pride, I want to do something about that. And another line that was pretty heavy was that the municipality is perceived as not being business friendly and that there's a lack of support for local business. Fellow councillors, I know that you agree with what I'm saying. I know you do. The last point about us as council signing this, I think this will be different and wholesome. If anyone has a business and they've ever contacted their MPP's office, that individual is elected. They're on a party and they are elected and they sign that as a single signature. And the same goes for our Member of Parliament. You would get a recognition certificate signed by that individual as they were elected to represent Grey Bruce Owen Sound. We have been elected to represent the ratepayers inside this municipality. and every one of us have the same heart and desire to serve. And I added that line for your consideration, that these certificates are signed by the mayor, the deputy mayor, and sitting council, and we'll all have a shot at going out, meeting these businesses and saying thank you. One of 7, but the voice is carried by the weight of 7. Fellow councillors, I hope I get a unanimous support. Thank you.
So well said, Councillor Bell. Any comments around the table? No, I think this is really a nice gesture. And I'm thinking as you're speaking about how we could perhaps formulate an event around this for the presentation of these certificates. So I think there's a lot of merit in supporting this. So I'll ask for all in favor of moving forward with this motion as presented. Thank you. And next we have a motion from Councillor Kentner, road renaming. You will move that, Councillor Kentner?
Well, thank you through your worship,
And I
Deputy
just
Mayor.
have to get a seconder first.
Sorry.
A seconder? Then Councillor Greenfield, thank you. And please go ahead, Councillor
So
Kentner.
I think people will recall the discussion about road names, heritage road names and traditional names being removed from when they wear out. It turned out this is not quite as difficult to change as we thought, so we have a simple motion here, which I'll read very quickly. And I just I've reduced it to just Frogs Hollow Side Road and Nighthawk Valley Road. And the reason I have not included the Gerald Short Parkway there is because I have assurances that that was sort of misstated, that in fact, should the signs deteriorate, they will continue to be maintained going forward. So it's just whereas the municipal road naming policy that was approved by bylaw number 2016-07 does not address commemorative or historic road names in addition to the official road name, and whereas Nighthawk Valley Road and Frogs Hollow Side Road were previously recognized with signs in addition to their official road names of 7th Side Road and 4th Side Road, and whereas one of Council's strategic initiatives is to preserve and celebrate Meaford's cultural heritage, and whereas the County of Grey updated their road naming policy to permit commemorative road naming in 2013, now therefore Council hereby directs staff to bring back a revised road naming policy for Council's consideration that would permit the use of commemorative road names in addition to the official road name.
Thank you, Councillor Kentner. Is there any discussion on this motion? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Kentner. I fully support this line in here that says about how council celebrates heritage. People know where they live. People have been talking about where they live for generations in our fine municipality, and I fully support this recommendation to be voted on. I like it.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Then I'll ask for an all in favor to accept this as presented. Thank you. Okay, we'll move forward to adoption of minutes. The council meeting of October the 22nd, 2019. Could I have a mover and a seconder for those? Councillor Vickers, Councillor Kentner. Is there any discussion of those minutes? Then we'll accept those as presented. All in favor? Thank you. The closed meeting minutes of October the 22nd, 2019. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Bell and Councillor Greenfield. And recognizing that there is any discussion of these minutes, we will need to go back into closed session. Does anyone wish to do that? No, so all in favor of accepting these minutes as presented. Thank you. Now, communications. I have a couple that I'd like to see pulled. Does anyone have any they'd like to see pulled from this list? Councillor Bell.
Well, I'd like to just speak for a moment on item F about the flying request of the local Legion.
Item F. And I would pull item I and K. And anyone else? Okay. So go ahead, Councillor Bell, on item F.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So, as many have taken note, that there was a nice article that was done in the Meaford Independent And if you take note of the flagpole downtown, you will see a flag that has a single poppy on it. And I want to just take this opportunity to express thank you to members of staff who helped our president and our poppy chairman to move forward and actually in a fairly quick manner on this. We didn't have a lot of time as a Legion when the new banners were available, and we obtained one. And I just want to say that members of our Legion, and I hope our community is happy to see that with Remembrance Day next week, that thank you of getting that up on the flagpole. And big thank you to the staff who were there to help out. It was great.
Thank you to Councillor Bell, and I can just add what an honor it was to be there and to accept the first poppy. I was really honored to be able to do that, and thank you for bringing poppies for all of Council today, Councillor Bell. I know it's Remembrance Day is a really important day, and especially for yourself, so we appreciate that. Item I, the Grey County Resolution, maximizing the assessment base. And this was a motion that came forward to county, which encouraged all of the lower tier municipalities to have a look and see if we were up to date. The town of Blue Mountains has actually found about $1 million, and that's pretty incredible. But of course, they have a lot of development and a lot of growth happening. So I just thought we should ask Mr. Armstrong if you feel that it's worthy of our municipality to have a look into this, or do you feel we're pretty much up to date?
Yeah, through Deputy Mayor, I'll probably defer to Darcy. I do recall in the past that we did have an individual that was seeking out assessment for us and stuff that wasn't assessed properly, but Darcy would probably have a better idea on how big of an impact it would be on Meaford.
Through the Deputy Mayor, we have Marg, so we're in good hands. I think the intention of this from the town of the Blue Mountains was that not all municipalities are like us in Blue in actually putting proper staff resourcing towards assessment management. But we do a very good job of assessment management. Marg certainly knows what she's doing, and she does her job well. And I know the staff over in town of Blue Mountains, and they do also. But there are a number of municipalities in Grey County that do not have anyone allocated even part-time to assessment-based management. And I think the concern is that if we're doing a good job of assessment-based management, it means that locally, the right taxpayers are paying the right amount of the right share. But if we do a better job of actually managing our assessment, therefore increasing our overall assessment, and there are other lower tier municipalities that are not doing that, then what happens is it shifts the county burden more onto those municipalities that are doing the job that they should be doing. So I think that's where the real issue is.
Thank you for that explanation, Mr. Chapman, and kudos to Marg, and hopefully she stays with us for a long time yet to come. Councillor Greenfield.
Deputy Mayor Keamy, I guess either to you or to Mr. Chapman, did these newfound dollars have anything to do with short-term accommodation taxation?
Through the Deputy Mayor, no. This is just assessment coming on stream from new development. So, you know, they found $880,000 in prior assessment. I mean, what we're suggesting for 2020's budget at $239,000, that 1.7%, that's kind of falls in line with the same type of thinking of what, it's just they had a bunch of stuff that was stockpiled that unfortunately you have to keep on top of MPAC and really manage new files to make sure that they keep going through the stream and like new buildings, so that MPAC comes out, assesses it, it actually hits the most current roll that it can. And clearly, as you can see from this, where Blue received money going as far back as 2017, MPAC was not, you know, on top of things as good as they can. And unfortunately, as much as MPAC says that Their business model is to make sure that they look at 8% of the total housing market on an annual basis across the province. They have quotas set for different areas. So in Town Blue Mountain's case, their staff kept on kind of hammering MPAC, but MPAC kind of had stopped last year doing assessment work because they'd hit their maximum quota in the area because they only have so many resources for each area. So that's why TBM had to wait till the next year, and then that's why there's this backlog of assessment that happens. So it's about service level expectations with MPAC quite often as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. I mean, what I heard was that some people who had built new homes were still just being taxed on a vacant lot, and so that was the sort of thing that they were able to recoup. Councillor Vickers.
Through your worship, like it seems like a pretty basic setup. Like you go to the building department, you get a permit. The building department then tells MPAC, here, this is a building permit. You need to go take a look. Like it, I don't understand why it's an issue. Like it just, these are things that kind of drive the average person and a lot of people kind of crazy that, that it does have to happen like this. So we do have to have somebody on top of it because really, like it's a pretty easy go. Rick and Tammy hand over the permits to MPAC, go look at these people. I had a building permit there a few years ago. The MPAC girl came out a year later. It all seemed pretty fluid. So I guess I'm confused why we have the problems that we do.
Through the Deputy Mayor, it only seems fluid because our staff keep on top of things. So it's just not about the permit, like getting the permit. It's about closing the permit off, getting occupancy. In a lot of cases, people feel as though if they don't get final occupancy, then that doesn't trigger MPAC coming out, and it actually doesn't. So MPAC won't come out until there's final occupancy unless we as the municipality push that. So that it's about having that good, strong working relationship between Marg and Rick and them doing some homework every once in a while to say, hey, here's open property files, and is somebody really living in that house, or is it at 90% completion, so you can maximize the tax revenue? Because to the Deputy Mayor's comments about going back a couple of years in taxes, well, the problem is that there are sunsets, right? So you can actually only bill back a couple of years. So if you don't stay on top of it, there is assessment and taxation that gets lost forever if you let it go on too long. So that's why it's about being diligent.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. And I think what happened in the town of Blue Mountains is that they just, they're exploding. They've got so much development, and they just weren't able to keep up until they recognized that they were missing out on a huge amount of funds. Any other comments on this one? Okay. We'll move on to item K, and I'll ask you, Mr. Chapman, to speak to that, the OMPF fund, and where we're sitting this year.
As noted during the budget presentation from a couple hours ago, we're receiving about $21,000 more in funding than we did in 2019. So not really a whole lot that you can take to the bank, but hey, at least it's not going down, which is what there is certainly some concern after last year's AMO conference where they froze the program. They were late in announcing how much money we were going to get, and there was certainly a concern that it was going to be reduced. So, I'm just happy that it didn't go down.
That is good news. Thank you, Darcy. Is there anything from the correspondence list that anyone would like pulled? I'd like to pull item 20 just for a couple of points. And that is the announcement by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Honourable Steve Clark. I believe, Councillor Greenfield, you mentioned earlier about service delivery reviews. The government is now providing $125 million over 4 years to 405 small and rural municipalities. This is application-based funding, but will help municipalities conduct service delivery reviews and implement process improvements in the delivery of such reviews. So I just thought that might be something Council would take note of, and we could have a discussion at a later date about whether we wanted to encourage staff to apply for some of that funding. And the other thing I wanted to mention was on the issue of the regional government review. The minister has announced that there will be no forced amalgamations. The government will provide municipalities with resources to support local decision-making and will not be pursuing a top-down approach. AMO believes the province has listened to municipalities and concluded that municipalities are best positioned to determine their own governments. So I see this as very good news because I think there was concern that that there was the potential for this area to be considered for another amalgamation. So I just really think it's important that that be noted, that we are safe. Okay, anything else from the correspondence list? Then that brings us down to adjournment, and I would ask for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Bell.
Don't need one.
Don't need one. Done. Okay, we're done.